All right, it's Monday, Irish fans, so you know what time it is. It is recruiting. Oh, wait, nope, we're not going to do that today. We're going to talk the NFL draft. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at IrishBreakdown.com. That dude right there is Ryan Roberts. Man, you don't know, Ryan, how long it took me and Vince to figure out how to point to the person because it's actually opposite. It's a little difficult.
I still get that wrong. I still get it wrong.
Well, it takes time. It takes lots of practice. That is Ryan Roberts. He's the director of recruiting, but he is also my go-to NFL draft guy. So Ryan and I we probably talked more this weekend continuously than we ever have just talking about the draft. Wild weekend, Ryan. And we obviously talked Friday about Kyle Hamilton being taken number one in the first round, number 14 overall. It was the highest a Notre Dame defensive player had been drafted since, I believe it was Bryant Young in 1994. Highest a Notre Dame defensive back had been drafted since Todd Light went fifth in, I believe it was 1991. So even though he fell below what people thought going in, still obviously a great situation for him, which we talked about. Notre Dame only had one other guy drafted, which to you and I was a surprise. I thought at least one more guy would get drafted, especially as we watched all the guys getting drafted off the analytics, the testing and things like that. But just one more guy got drafted. That was Kyren Williams to the Los Angeles Rams in the fifth round with the number 164 overall pick. I know one guy that was super excited to see Kyren Williams get drafted because my partner in crime here is a Rams fan. So let's take the Homer Rams hat off for a second. Let's put the NFL draft cap on, Ryan. Let's talk a little bit about the fit of Kyren Williams to the Los Angeles Rams. Fifth round does not guarantee you a roster spot, obviously. So let's talk about the fit. What do you like about it? Let's talk about whether or not he has a chance to make this team and how you see his career with the Rams going.
Yeah, I think he definitely has a chance to make the team. I think that's I don't want to say it's safe to say because anything could happen, but they are obviously They lost Sony Michel this offseason, so they were down and back, obviously, just in general from the running backs. They have Cam Akers coming back, who was lost for most of the season until the playoff run due to the Achilles injury. And then they also had Darrell Henderson, who has also dealt with a little bit of injuries during his career, more nagging injuries than serious injuries, but he's been limited in some roles as well. So I think Kyren, first and foremost, is going to make the team because I think one thing that I highlighted in a recent article on the site, Brian, was last year Notre Dame. Last year the Rams running backs had 53 combined receptions, which in 17 games is not a huge number, right? For that number of games.
I would say that's probably a pretty small number for two guys. I mean, you had running backs getting close to 90 catches in the last couple of years.
That wasn't even just the two guys either. That was including Sony Michel, who I think had 3 catches as well. So the running backs as a group only had 53 catches. So we know people are going to question what is Kyren's upside as far as like a high volume carrier. And I completely get that conversation. But I think the baseline that we know is that Kyren Williams is a really good pass catcher and he's a really good pass blocker. And he's going to be able to have that type of role on the next level. So him coming into that situation, I think first and foremost, he has a pretty good baseline because we know Sean McVay is a really intelligent offensive mind. He's going to be able to use Kyren, I think, in the passing game, run angles, run option routes. There's going to be a role, I think, for Kyren Williams going into 2022 season. The reason that I'm really excited about it, though, is because the two running backs I talked about already, Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, have each missed time during their careers. Cam Akers, we just talked about, had the injury this past season. He was also banged up a little bit during his Florida State career at points, too. So he's had some injury issues during his career just in general. And Darrell Henderson, I feel like every time Darrell Henderson gets a shot to be the lead back, he does really well, and then he'll get an nagging injury. It's usually like a soft tissue thing, right? Like he's got some type of hamstring or calf strain or whatever it ends up being. And then he's a guy that just has not been able to carry the momentum full time. So I think this is literally Kyren Williams is one injury, and obviously we're not hoping for injuries, but he's one injury away. And in front of him are two guys that have had injury concerns in the past. So I think Kyren has a baseline as a really good pass catching running back in this role for the Los Angeles Rams. And maybe it becomes more because running backs, we know, especially when you start getting injuries, running backs have a short shelf life anyway. So now when injuries start getting into the equation, that's when things really start getting muddled a little bit. So I think Kyren fell into a good situation from a practicality perspective. And then, hey, he's going to be on the Super Bowl, defending Super Bowl champion, right? So not a bad situation to drop into. Living in Los Angeles, not my cup of tea, but for some people, they really like that lifestyle. So I feel good for Kyren, man. Obviously he fell. I was predicting before the draft. I think the final prediction was like 4th round, which, was in a decent ballpark. He ends up going in the 5th round, but I think he really did fall into a good situation.
Because I think there were some runs on a couple other positions during that period of time too, which is going to bump guys down. And that's what even adds more to how surprised I was that Kevin Austin didn't get picked, because there was such a run on wide receivers that, well, he's going to get picked now. Look at all the receivers that are getting picked. But I think the other thing that factors into this too, Ryan, is we have to consider the implications of the financial implications of something like this, right? And you draft a guy like Kyren Williams, if he shows you the ability to be a number one, I don't know if Kyren's number one in the NFL, but I probably wouldn't have thought Austin Eckler was coming out of college either, or Terrell Davis. I mean, you never know how it goes. But if he shows the ability to be a number 2, there's 2 guys ahead of him making a lot more money, and this is an organization that has committed a lot of money to certain players and is going to have some other big contracts coming up too. So that's another one of those things where being a 5th round pick can help you if you show the ability to be a legitimate player for that football team. So I think that factors in as well. And Sean McVay had a very interesting, we've said on this show before that Tommy Rees is a guy that really, really likes. I mean, if you talk about, we believe that based on things we've heard and people we've talked to, that 2 coaches that Tommy Rees has a lot of respect for in regards to studying the game of football is Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, which is 2 pretty good offensive minds if you're going to study. And Sean McVay had some very interesting stuff to say about the Notre Dame offense, and that being a factor in what they liked about Kyren Williams, Ryan. And did you hear his comments about that? And he basically said they run a lot of the same stuff we do, and talked about how it's going to be a really easy transition for Kyren because the Notre Dame offense is very similar to what the Rams do, which makes sense when you consider, Tommy Rees is an NFL background, not just he coached for a year in the NFL, but his dad was in the NFL a long time. And the fact that, he does look at McVay and Shanahan, who are considered 2 of the best minds in the game. I think that's fair, especially when you look at McVay. How many of his assistant coaches have been hired as head coaches, in recent years? It's a lot.
It's a crazy number.
It's a situation where, where this is where you say, this is good for Kyren, but it's also a situation, Ryan, where it's good for Notre Dame too. I mean, that's a good recruiting tool, right? So, Ryan, I'm gonna talk about a couple things here real quick as you pop out real quick and try to get that mic situation going, and we'll get that fixed here real quick. But I think when you look at Kyren too, you wonder about a kid. There's certain physical limitations he has. We've talked about them before, but the one thing we've learned about Kyren is he's not a guy you necessarily want to bet against. And now that he's kind of, fallen in the draft, it's kind of a situation I look at and say, boy, he's going to go in there with a little extra motivation, which is a good thing for Kyren, obviously. I think the other part of it too, we've had people ask about if Kyren and Kevin have regretted, do we think they regret their decisions? I doubt that either does that, and I hope that neither regrets their decision, because it doesn't matter now. There's nothing you can do about it now. So you might as well just focus on what's next. And I think if you're Kyren Williams, you look at it 2 ways, Ryan. It's number one, I'm disappointed maybe that I went fell further than I thought. I mean, there was people talking about how he could, going into the year, maybe be one of the top couple running backs off the board. He wasn't even in the top 10, I don't think, at this point in time, because of, there's certain factors, but I think size is part of it, the poor testing, and not just the 40 time, but where Kyle Hamilton had a bad 40 time, but his other testing numbers were really good. Kyren had no good testing numbers. The explosiveness wasn't there. None of that stuff was there. So I think that factored into it as well. But at this point in time, I just think his focus is on, hey, you know what? I went further than I expected, but like you said, Ryan, I'm going to the Super Bowl champs. And
Yeah.
I'm going to a situation with a depth chart that's favorable. There aren't a lot of fifth-round draft picks you look at and say, boy, that's a good depth chart situation for that guy, and he fits a need that they have. It's hard to find need fits in round 5, in my opinion. It just is, and the Rams were able to do that, which is one of the reasons why the Rams have been able to become one of the better organizations in the NFL.
Yeah, I think people kind of underrate the Rams a little bit because they say, like, you don't have first-round draft capital. They don't believe in early-round picks. But they are a team that has historically, over the last few years, under less need, really hit on those later round selections. So hopefully this is the next one in that line of really nice late round selections. And for Kyren, I don't think he regrets it at all. I mean, we could have I think, a better conversation with the Kevin Austin side of it, I think. But running back is such a position that just is so dependent on situation, right? Like, it honestly doesn't matter as much, where you get drafted when you're a running back. It matters who you get drafted to. So I think that Kyren could outplay that 5th round evaluation, even if he just becomes a really good third down back at the next level. But I continue to just tell people, we have seen, going back to Kyren Williams recruiting and then into his career, he's not exactly a guy that you want to count out. He's not exactly a guy that you just paint it black. Brian, for the majority of his recruitment, you could back this up a little bit. I think he was a 4-star by some publications, but there were some that only had him as a 3-star throughout most of this situation. So,
he became a 4-star late.
Yeah.
Like, after his really good senior year, he was a 3-star for most of the process. And I had him ranked very low in my class. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, he's always been, and that's what I was saying, Ryan, when you were out the first time. It's like, I've learned not to bet against Kyren Williams. I could pick apart his game and his athleticism and all these different things. I could do it in high school. I could do it in Notre Dame. I could do it now. But the fact is the kid is just a good football player. And there's something to say about that. And you talked about the Rams. Remember last year they drafted a Notre Dame player in the 7th round who ended up, getting some targets in the Super Bowl. Didn't catch all of them, but hurt in the AFC Championship. But Ben Skronik made the team and fit, and that was the whole Notre Dame offense thing was a factor there. Jordan Fuller was a 6th round draft pick. Wasn't he a starter this year before he got hurt for the Rams? I believe played a bunch.
Jordan Fuller has been a really good player since they drafted him in the 6th round. One of the better defensive backs. Yeah, it's crazy.
So, and there's a couple other guys I could go through it and name them, but they've, like you said, Ryan, they've done Greg Gaines was a 4th round pick.
Good player.
They've done really well on day 3, finding good football players. Some starters, some depth guys, but that's where NFL teams, like, yeah, you got to do on the early rounds, but that can make or break you is how well do you do in those rounds, especially if you're a team that has committed a lot of money and early draft picks to veterans. You have to be able to get the Jordan Fullers and the Kyren Williams and the guys like that are making league minimum and are able to go out there and be good football players for you.
Even Darius Williams, who left this offseason, the cornerback, who was a starting corner for them in the Super Bowl, I think he was an undrafted player. Cooper Kupp was a 3rd or 4th round pick. John Johnson, I'm sure you remember, for Boston College, he was a really good player for the Rams before he left this last offseason. He's a 3rd or 4th round pick. So, yeah, the Rams have done a really good job of hitting late round selections. Hopefully, Kyren Williams is a hit for them. And Brian, I just find it hard to imagine. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to be a perennial 1,000-yard back. I don't believe that, right? But I'd be very hard-pressed if Kyren Williams doesn't carve out a decent niche at the next level for a few years as a 3rd down back. Like, I would just be very surprised if that didn't happen.
I'm going to continue to say this. If Philip Lindsay can have 2,000-yard seasons in the NFL, Kyren Williams can be a number 1 back in the NFL. I'm sorry. And Kyren brings a lot more to the table as a pass catcher, in my opinion, than Philip Lindsay. So, yeah, there's other backs where I'm like, maybe that guy's a little bigger. But we've talked about this. Kyren's never been a home run threat on film, but I've never watched him and say, boy, he lacks the juice to play at a high level. I've never really thought that. So, we'll see how it pans out. There's obviously only 2 Notre Dame players got picked. We'll kind of talk about what that means here as we transition from 22 draft to 23 draft. But there were some guys that got signed. Obviously, Notre Dame had, by my count so far, 6 players signed. You had Kevin Austin got a $230,000 contract from the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is one of the bigger ones that they've handed out.
Guaranteed money.
200, I think it was like 205 of it was guaranteed, and then $25,000 signing bonus. The signing bonus is money you get, so it's entirely guaranteed, right? Like that's the point of it. That's a big deal. I mean, you're getting six figures as an undrafted free agent. That means they wanted you. Jack Cohn signed with the Colts. Myron Tungavaloa Amosa signed with the Raiders. Kurt Heinisch signed with the Houston Texans. Drew White signed with the Washington Commanders. And then Isaiah Pryor signed with the New Orleans Saints. So 6 Notre Dame players signed as undrafted free agents. The two I want to focus on the most, number one, I think the last guy we mentioned, I think it could have a really good shot at making the Saints. Because again, you're signing a guy like that not to become a starting strong safety for you. You're signing him to be a David Bruton, Sergio Brown type of guy, a guy that is going to be a really good special teams player. And the physical tools that maybe hurt Isaiah as a defensive player, the hips, the coverage, that doesn't matter as a kickoff punt cover guy. It's can you run down and hit, and Isaiah can run and hit, and he's a willing special teams guy. I mean, he could have easily packed it in and not play this past year when it was obvious he wasn't going to start, but he was a really good teammate and a really good special teams player for Notre Dame. So I could see him making it. Kevin Austin's an interesting one, Ryan, because when you give that kind of money to a guy, it's because you fully expect him to make your football team. You don't give almost $250,000 to a guy to come in and be a body during camp. They fully expect Kevin Austin to come in and compete for a role. I mean, for a spot on that roster. And if he's willing to work, this is going to be the big thing with Kevin. Does he have enough self-awareness of his game? This has been my question all along, Ryan. You know this, and we've talked publicly and privately. Does he have enough self-awareness of where he is as a football player to put in the work to maximize his potential? If he does, he's going to be one of the steals of this undrafted free agent class. If he doesn't, he's going to continue to do with the Jaguars what he did in Notre Dame, and that is flash potential, but largely underachieve. It's all on Kevin now at this point in time. It's completely up to him.
Yeah, I mean, and as you illustrated already, he got one of the bigger contracts as far as guaranteed money for UDFA. So the Jacksonville Jaguars wanted Kevin Austin. I'm sure there was a little bit of a bidding war probably for him, during the latter stages of the draft when the agents are obviously getting hit up and offers are kind of getting thrown out there. So
and he's got Drew Rosenhaus as an agent, so
which never hurts for your bank account. So yeah. I think that if I remember correctly, the Jacksonville Jaguars did not draft a wide receiver during that draft, if I remember correctly.
I think you're correct. I'm going to go check on that now.
Because they let go of DJ Chark this offseason. They signed Christian Kirk, but obviously DJ Chark's the 6'4" wide receiver, right? So he's more of the boundary in outside the numbers type of receiver, which is what Kevin obviously projects to best. So I think Kevin's gonna have a chance to make that team. He's a talented player. For him to stick immediately, it's going to be about how willing are you to play special teams and how willing are you to perfect your craft. Those are going to be the two biggest things that's going to be the difference between him making the team or not, because there has never, ever been any questions about Kevin Austin's athletic ability or ability to potentially turn into a good football player. It's the 1-2, right? It's that drive. And if he has that drive, he's going to make the team, in my opinion. And then from there, it only takes a chance, right? Like the development follows. All it takes is one chance for him to take a role. So that's further into the future. The short term is, do you want to play at this level? If you do, you're going to do everything it takes to make the team.
And that's something that I think a lot of young players need to learn. And this is something that I think Notre Dame did a disservice to some of their players with. I can't remember Kevin Austin ever being on special teams. And I'm sorry, that's like as a freshman when he's catching 5 passes, there's no excuse for him to not have been on some kickoff coverage teams. I'm sorry. And if he doesn't want to do it, then that tells you everything you need to know about him. And I'm not saying he didn't want to do it. That's a general point. I want to see more teams like Notre Dame. I want to see this new staff do a better job of that, because that's going to hurt a guy. Because to your point, Ryan, when you have a kid that's there's kids with similar measurables as him or similar testing times with more production, but you know what they had that Kevin didn't? They had film of them running down on kickoffs and punts covering people, and He doesn't. So that's going to be a big thing. But that's a depth chart that absolutely can be moved up on if he's willing to put in the work. And to your question, Ryan, they drafted 7 guys. They only drafted 2 offensive players, period. They drafted Snoop Connor at running back, and they drafted Luke Fortner, the center from Kentucky. That's it. The rest of their focus is on defense. So you're correct. There is a great opportunity there for Kevin Austin to make that team. I really liked Jack Cohn signing with the Colts as well. They gave him a smaller contract. So obviously, he's going to be in competition there. But Sam Erlinger is a guy that I think can be beat out for that job. And James Morgan definitely. I never understood when James Morgan went in the 4th round. I forget who drafted him, but I was like, seriously?
It was the Jets. It was the Jets.
The Jets? Oh, that figures. Before the current administration was in charge, because I think this group at least this weekend, did a whole lot better job. So, to me, I thought this was a good place for Jack. It's a system that fits him. I think learning under Matt Ryan, it's not like they put a premium on mobile quarterbacks. They signed Matt Ryan. You know what I mean? So, there's the notion of, okay, well, you want a backup that can run around and do some things like a Sam Ehlinger. But I think this is an opportunity. I'm not saying he's going to beat those guys out, because Sam Ehlinger is not going to go down without a fight either. But I think it's an opportunity where he could at least be a 3rd string guy that's on the practice squad, maybe win a number 2 job, that kind of thing. So I thought Jack went to a good spot. I mean, there's maybe a couple others you could look at and say, well, that's a good place for him. That's a good place for him. But I think going to the Colts is a really good situation for Jack Cohn.
You mentioned them signing Matt Ryan. I mean, 2 out of the last 3 years, they've had Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers, so they do not care about athleticism at the quarterback position.
Nope.
They care about quick processing and getting the ball out of your hands, and that's what Jack Cohn has historically been for Notre Dame. At Wisconsin, that's just something that he's always done well. So
Jules agrees. I mean, she completely agrees. I can tell. She agrees. This is a good, smart move by Jack Cohn.
Yep, no the dog agrees. Juliet agrees. Everybody agrees that Jack Cohn is a good fit in Indianapolis.
No doubt. It's a little tougher for linemen. I think to make this, you broke it down. If you want to kind of get Ryan's thoughts on like Myron Tungavaloa Mosa and Kurt Hinish and Drew White, you can check out the article at irishbreakdown.com. I always feel like linebackers have a better chance at making these kind of things because they bring so much special teams ability to the table, where a defensive lineman like a Kurt Hinish with the Texans or Myron with the Raiders, they've got to actually make the team. Now, I could expect them to maybe be scout team guys, or practice squad guys, excuse me, not scout team. They are the scout team, but it's called practice squad. I could see them making the practice squad. There's no doubt, especially with their character and work ethic, but it's going to be hard for them it's harder for those type of guys to make a team unless there's a need. And as you broke down, there's not really a need necessarily for the Raiders, but I'd love to see both of those kids make it. Great kids. And here's the thing, if they get cut, especially early, there's going to be someone there to try to scoop them up. They're going to get opportunities. There's no question about it. And so we'll kind of see how that plays out.
I broke down obviously in the article a little bit. I like the Texan fit for Hinish a little more than the Myron fit, just because there is not a lot of depth inside, especially for the Houston Texans. I think that he could be a practice squad type of guy next year. I think that it is very possible. Myron's going to be tough, man, because that edge room, Chandler Jones obviously is up top, right, with Max Crosby, which that's one of the better edge duos in the NFL right now. But then you also have guys like Cleveland Farrell that are on there. That was a former first-round pick. And there's a good amount of depth in that edge room for the Las Vegas Raiders. So I think that's going to be a little tougher. I think the only saving grace, well, I don't say the only saving grace, the big sticking point that he may have is that not a lot of those guys can also play inside on pass rushing downs. They can't give you much pass rush potential from the interior. So maybe that's his sticking point. But I did not love that fit just for possibility of making the roster. I think it's going to be a little tough for MTA, unfortunately.
Here's something, Ryan, and Creaky brought this up. He said with over 2,000 draft eligible players this year, I understand why a lot of players do not get drafted.
Yep.
That problem doesn't just exist once, through the draft, and when the draft is over. It's because all these guys are signing too. And there's going to be a lot more competition for those free agent roster spots as well. So it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, that stat is still one of the craziest ones. It was around 650 players last year draft eligible. This year there was over 2,100 actually. So it is a it's going to be a weird ripple effect, right? Because obviously a lot of players went undrafted that probably should have been drafted or would have been drafted in most years, right? So that's going to push everybody back a few rounds into the UDFA situation. And then you're also going to see the ripple effect, honestly, that the fact that hey, so a lot of those players there's going to be a lot more UDFAs this year that I think they're going to push out some mid-tier veterans. I think that's going to happen. The only saving grace though, for some of these players is it's a lot like the transfer portal. There's going to be less opportunity, obviously. But the one good thing is that now you do have the XFL, you have the USFL, you still have Canada. There's a Mexican football league, apparently. There's a European football league. So, there are professional aspirations for a lot of guys, and there are a lot of possibilities. So that's the saving grace for the overpopulation of players.
I want to get into some draft questions here, Ryan, that people have before we transition to the next topic. And I'm going to focus kind of on the 2022 draft questions here. And Tavis McKay says, with Kevin Austin's testing numbers, were you at all shocked he was not even drafted? Do you think teams might have been hesitant due to Boykin not panning out? There was a couple others about Kevin Hart. I want to kind of bring some of those up here real quick. This is another one. Rob Lobo, 123. Do we know anything about Kevin Austin's medical evaluation? Could be the reason he was not drafted like Ross from Clemson? First of all, his medical situation is nothing like Justin Ross's. The reason Justin Ross, and I don't think still has not signed with anybody, it's not that he could get hurt. There's concern that something bad, really bad, could happen to him. He has pins all down his neck.
Yeah.
He is landing wrong in a camp away from being paralyzed. And I don't think anybody wants that on their conscience. I think that's the sad thing for Justin Ross, for me, especially when he just wasn't the same player. I mean, it'd be one thing, let's be honest, if he was the same player in 2021 that he was before, he may not have been drafted, we don't know, but somebody would have signed him and taken that risk. But he's not the same player. Kevin Austin is still a really talented player. And so when you look at his testing numbers, I think his testing numbers is why Ryan and I were shocked that he didn't get picked. But it's one thing to be shocked that someone didn't take a chance on him and still completely understand why he wasn't picked. There's a lot of things with Kevin that factor into this. It's not just one thing. And I don't think, Ryan, to me, none of the one things is enough for him to go undrafted with his God-given ability. It's the combination of things. Full-year suspension in 2019 for off-the-field, poor decision-making, stupid stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the foot injury in 2020, which he injured twice. I don't think that is completely ignored by teams. He did kind of have it once, and he came back this year. He was fine. It didn't bother him on the field. Clearly didn't bother him in testing. But anytime you have a foot injury like that, there's always going to be a little bit of concern that it could become a reoccurring thing in time. So I think that's something that's on people's minds. It's just another little check to him. I think that, I'd be curious to hear from people how Kevin's interviews went, because I think Kevin is a smart kid, but sometimes I think Kevin has a lack of understanding of who he is and where his game is. And that's not from a confidence standpoint. Kyren has a severe lack of understanding for how good he is. And I think, and I mean that in a good way. Kyren Williams thinks he's the athlete that Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker is, and he plays with a great confidence himself, but he works his butt off to get to that confidence. He's always working to be better. Kevin, I have always, and I can just go back to a conversation I had with him back when I worked at Rivals. He was at the Rivals camp in Indianapolis, and he was just getting his butt whooped at the line of scrimmage from a jam standpoint. And I went up to him and tried to give him little pointers, and he just kind of, dismissed it and then kept going out and getting his butt kicked, against any good corner that could jam him. And it was the same problem for him 4 years later, right? So, there's the Avery Davis attitude of, I know I need to be good at this, and I know I'm getting coached, so let me go look at YouTube videos and try to do this. And then there's a Kevin Austin version of, I'm just going to do what I do. I think that factors in as well, because that led to this is what you have to understand. We've talked about this, folks. There's some really bad film for Kevin Austin. You go watch him against Cincinnati and you're like, yeah, that's an undrafted player. And Ryan has said this. Ryan has said there's film of Kevin Austin makes him look like a day one, day two player. And there's film of Kevin Austin makes him look like he's a guy that shouldn't be drafted. And that when you stack all those things on top of each other, I think they all led to, combined with a huge draft class, a huge receiver draft class. And hey, there's a lot of dudes running the 4.4s in this year's wide receiver draft class. A lot of dudes. So I just think all those things, to me, Ryan, factor together that to go into why he was just not a guy that NFL teams were willing to take a chance on when it came to a draft pick.
Yeah, I think you illustrated everything really well. It's a multi-layered thing. It's not a medical issue. It's not. It's not something where there's a recurring issue where it's a big enough injury where people are going to hesitate, and that's why he went undrafted. The real world is that his film isn't very good, right? And you were going to bet on the athlete. And in most years, that works out. But in this class where there's over 2,100 players, I think that's really what hurt you, right? And we can only speculate on what the interviews went, that type of situation. But the fact of the matter is could the Miles Boykin thing not panning out have hurt him a little bit? Sure. But also, I think if Miles Boykin was in this class where there's a larger amount of players, he might not get drafted either, right? Like, that's just
I think he would have got drafted, but he wouldn't have got drafted as high as he did.
No, not in the 4th round or whatever it was.
He was third.
Right? Third round. Yeah,
he would have gone because he had good film. And that's the thing, is Miles was a good player all of 2018. And you could go back to the 2017 game when he's going against Dante Jackson and Greedy Williams, and he's torching them. Kevin never had that. Every time Kevin played a good corner, he got whipped. I mean, whipped. And that's the difference.
And another thing too, Brian, is I think people need to understand this for a second, right? Like when these scouts watch film of players, they're usually only watching like 3 to 4 games. They're not watching the whole season, right? So they usually pick out the best games against the best competition. Well, you already mentioned one, right? Cincinnati. That's going to be one that people watched of Kevin Austin. Right. Going to be like, because you're facing a number 4 overall pick on one side, and then another corner that got drafted as well, right? Like, that's the game that you're going to watch. Oh, and a safety that also went in the second round too, and Brian Cook, and another linebacker
and
that got drafted.
Game. But that's something
game.
Else, right?
Yeah, multiple kids on that defense, including 3 defensive backs that were drafted this year in 2022. In 2022 NFL draft, you're going to watch Kevin Austin that game. I was at that game.
Yeah,
it was awful, man. Like, let's be honest,
one
it is.
Catch
like,
for 17 yards.
One catch. That drop he had over the middle, the deep middle, was awful. Like, it was bad film. Like, let's just call it what it is.
It was a big moment in the game too. I mean, he needed to make that play. I believe, if I remember correctly, that he did have more drops that game than he had catches. If I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and look at it. But that was another thing, is he, for as big as he is, he didn't win enough contested throws. This is something that we've also talked about. And it all comes down to, none of it, Ryan, to me, is about talent. And that's the thing that I'll say it again, is if Kevin works, if he uses this moment of humility as the thing that gets him to realize, like, I got to really take my craft super seriously. And we heard some comments from him like how he talked at the pro at the combine was different than how he talked to the pro day. And that leads me to believe that somebody kind of got in his ear and like, hey, dude, we're not hearing the right things from you, right? You need to show a little humility, right? And because he talked about putting in the work and all that other kind of stuff more at the pro day, which you were also at, than he did at the combine. If this becomes the thing, because all the negative things we said about him, Kevin is still very talented and certainly should have been better than what he did on film. So if he's willing to put in the work, his career may not start off how he wanted it, but it will go how he wants it. Because at the end of the day, Ryan, here's the other thing about the NFL. If he goes out there and taps in his potential, they're not going to give a rip that he's a 7th round draft pick. If anything, it might help him, because the guy that they drafted in the 3rd round 2 years before is going to be making a whole lot more money than Kevin. And they're going to have, you know what I mean? And they're going to have less control of him. And that may help him. So if he puts in the work, that's one thing I do love about the NFL. They have an investment in 1st round picks. But at the end of the day, they have a bigger investment in their jobs. And their jobs are, if this undrafted guy is going to help me but more than my 3rd round draft pick, then I'm going to play the undrafted guy. Right. And well, at least the good teams will. And I mean, that's the thing that I love. And that's what Kevin's thing is, Ryan. If he's willing to put in the work, I don't think either of us have any doubt that if he puts in the work, Kevin will be an NFL football player.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that Kevin Austin's going to play NFL football, at least on a practice squad, if he allows himself to, right? Like, it's going to be about him. He is going to make or break himself. A team is going to make room at worst on a practice squad for 6'2 plus, 4'4", 40-inch vert, 11-foot broad. Like, they're going to put that on the practice squad at worst. The question is he going to work for it? Like, that is the only thing. And that remains to be seen. He has an opportunity. And obviously, the Jaguars valued him. They gave him one of the bigger contracts we've seen in UDFA. So they value him. It's now about him taking the opportunity and running with it, hopefully.
I want to get to a couple other here questions about the 2022 draft before we move on, Ryan, to 2023 draft. Tavis McCase is out of the undrafted Notre Dame players, which landed in a spot for the most success due to the players' ability scheme of the team. So let's take Kevin aside and Jack aside. How about the rest of those guys between Myron, Heinisch, Drew White, and Isaiah Pryor? Who do you think landed in the best situation?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Pryor. Pryor is an interesting one because his whole thing is that can you make it on special teams, right? And like that's a big key. But I don't think that's necessarily pertinent to the team that he's being drafted to. I think that Isaiah Pryor would have an opportunity to maybe stick as a special teamer no matter where he goes. The one that I continue to say is Kurt Heinisch in Houston's not a bad spot, man. It's really not. If there's that's one of the better spots I think for Heinisch as far as trying to make this team as a practice squad player or maybe the end of the roster type of guy. Didn't love the one from Myron just because, again, I think that there's a lot of depth in the edge group for the Raiders, but there's not a lot of depth for the interior defensive line for the Houston Texans. So I think that Kurt is in a decent spot. Will he make it? We'll see. But either way, I do think that that's a decent spot for him.
I also think the fact that I don't believe the Raiders staff is new on defenses, or is it a new staff? So are they both new staffs? I know Houston's a new staff. Are the Raiders new staff as well?
They're Josh McDaniels led now. So
so that's the one saving grace for both of them is that at least they're going to situations where like these guys don't have long established relationships with the coaches. Matt 211 GT, thank you for the super chat, my man. If Kevin knew his game, I believe he stays. I would say if Kevin knew his game, I think he would have put in more work beforehand, and he still would have left. He would have just been a lot better version. I mean, if you want to get better, you can. If you know your coach isn't pushing you, do what Avery Davis did. Get on YouTube, go talk to someone. I mean, there's things you could do. But I hope it pans out. I like Kevin. I do. I've had a chance to meet him. I've met his mom before. She's a really cool lady, like really smart lady. I enjoyed talking to her back in the day. I have no issue with Kevin. I hope it works out for him. This is the reality of he put himself in this situation. And one thing I'll address too here. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about that after this is over with, because I want to kind of talk about there's been a lot of people talking about, being able to go back to school if you're not drafted. And I have some strong feelings on that I'd like to address as well. See, Tavis also asked Justin Ross. I want you to just kind of clarify this one too, Ryan. We kind of talked about it earlier because I'm getting a lot of questions about this, not just in the chat, but from others. Justin Ross not being drafted was a surprise to me. I understand the concerns. What surprises me more is the fact he still has not been picked up as an undrafted free agent. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, somebody put in the chat earlier that apparently the Kansas City Chiefs may have just signed him, so he's going to get an opportunity. The fact of the matter, though, is with Justin Ross, this isn't just continued lower body injuries where is the knee, like Carson Strong, for instance, right, is a player out of Nevada that the Philadelphia Eagles signed. He has a degenerative knee issue, right? And the question is, long-term, is that knee going to hold up, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, though, is that if he has a terrible knee for the rest of his life, he's still going to live, right? Like it's not going to.
He can still walk. He just may have a limp.
It's not going to be detrimental to his state of living as much, right? But Justin Ross is dealing with a neck injury, like congenital fusion surgery. It's not like a small thing. It's a massive, massive red flag. It is. Right. And I feel really terrible for Justin Ross because I think if anybody's heard me in here before when we talk about that Clemson team when he was a freshman, I was like, that dude's a top 10 pick in 2 years.
He's probably the first player off the board if he's healthy in this draft. If he never gets hurt and he just continues building on his first 2 years, to me, well, first of all, he'd have been a first-round draft pick last year because last year's the year he got hurt and had to sit out. But had he decided to stay for 4 years, let's just say all he did last year was an ACL. And he came back and he's fine. I mean, the Lions took Jamison Williams 12th with a torn ACL that he had just a minute ago, right? with all due respect to Drake London, I know you love Drake London. Justin Ross healthy is the best receiver in this draft class.
No question about
no
that.
debate.
No question.
No debate. And I'll say this real quick. I tweeted about this. That is why at the end of the day, I don't like how NIL is being run right now. I think it's embarrassing. I'm going to have some articles about that this week. We'll probably do a show on it. But the principle of NIL, he is the exact case on why it should have always been the case. Because now Justin Ross is never going to have the opportunity to make money off of his skill the way he could have. Whereas if NIL existed when he was a freshman, Justin Ross is going to sit there and say, you know what? Because of what I did at Clemson, because I helped lead my team to a championship, did what I did, I was able to have some opportunities where I'm still able to take care of my family, right? And I got a degree and an education and all this other kind of stuff. So that right there is why I'll never say NIL in a proper form is a bad thing because of that. I mean, just won't. So let's move on. Oh, here we go. So this will be kind of a transition from one to the other. So I want to talk about the 2022 class in relationship to the 2023 Notre Dame draft class, and then kind of take it to where we think that class can be. Because we've had a lot of people kind of bring this up and in relation to this, and I'm going to somewhat answer JP's question, but I'm going to more so use JP's question as a transition. And he says, scale of 1 to 10, how disappointed were you that only 2 Notre Dame players drafted, and what player undrafted was most disappointing to you? I would say the one that was most disappointing to me, just personally, was Myron. With what he's had to go through the last year, losing his dad, I would have really liked to have been able to see the video of him getting a call that he was drafted. I just think emotionally, I just think that would have been cool. Other than that, I mean, look, that's part of the process. You kind of get used to it after a while. How disappointed are you that only 2 guys got drafted? Ryan, I'd say scale of 1 to 10, say probably 5, 6. You know, I mean, we knew there was a chance that it could only be. I would say I never thought it'd be only 2. I thought that it could be 3.
I thought it'd be 3.
Thought between Austin and Cone, one of them would at worst. So I'm say probably 6 with that in mind. But I've heard a lot of JP, and thank you for the question, JP. Always appreciate you being a part of the show. I think for me, let's go and get that Friday mailbag thing off there. Didn't realize that was still on there. I think for me, Ryan, the big thing for me is a lot of people have come to me, and I don't know how much of this you've gotten, and saying, is it going to hurt Notre Dame that only had 2 guys picked? And I don't know if you saw my post on this on the board, but I went through this long list of like schools that like only had like 2 to 3 guys drafted, the year before monster years. In 1986, Miami plays for the national championship, and they had 2 guys drafted in the first 7 rounds. Another guy went like round 12, another guy went round 14, right? Which Notre Dame would have had at least 5 guys picked if there were still 15 rounds like there used to be, right? But the next year they go undefeated. Why? Because everybody came back, right? I mean, the year after Auburn won a national title, they had 4 guys get picked, right? I mean, Notre Dame has 14 starters coming back, 14 or 15 starters coming back. Most of their best players chose to come back for different reasons. So I'm not concerned about it. And a lot of people, and people say, well, this high ranked player didn't get picked. And I see, Thayer Mumford was a 7th round pick. Haskell Garrett was a top recruit. He went undrafted. Master Teague went undrafted, right? Clemson had 4 starters from Clemson's defense went undrafted this year, right? Like Josh Jobe from Alabama went undrafted, right? LeBron Ray, multi-year starter for Bama, former 5-star recruit, went undrafted. We have to understand that you can't just look at this little Notre Dame bubble and understand that this is happening to everybody. Georgia had that weird year just like LSU did. The reality is the NFL, for all of its analytics and all, it's still a bunch of humans with emotions. If Georgia doesn't win a national title, I doubt that their 3rd string tight end gets drafted this year. I'm sorry. I doubt it. I doubt that their backup guard gets drafted. I'm sorry. I don't see it happening. It's what we saw from LSU when they had a ton of guys get drafted a couple years ago. Just part of the deal. And I do think that the NFL still overdrafts the SEC. and I pointed this out the other day on our message board. Do you know there were more Big Ten players that were on the first or second team All-Pro last year than SEC? And if you look at the Big Ten plus Notre Dame, there were more Big Ten plus Notre Dame players last year on first or second team All-Pro than there was ACC and SEC combined. Right, so I'm that's a different conversation for a different day.
There were more North Dakota State players drafted this year than the University of Texas. Just putting it out there for a second.
And Notre Dame, I think, didn't they have 3?
They had the tackle, they had the wide receiver. Was there another one?
I thought there was another guy late.
Could have been.
But the point is, if you look at North Dakota State and North Dakota together, they had more guys than Notre Dame got picked. Why? Because most of Notre Dame's players came back. And that was the point of the articles we wrote yesterday. If you start looking at the early 2023 mock drafts, and do it for fun, because some of them are brutal. We saw one from today from Pro Football Focus that had it had Eric Gilbert going 5, right? Who didn't play last year, and no Michael Mayer in the first round. You had Anthony Richardson and Will Levis in the no. You had Will Levis going 8th, right? The Kentucky quarterback who couldn't beat out Sean Clifford at Penn State. It's just some of this stuff is absurd. But I do think there's enough reputable people that I look at and say, this is an example of what we're talking about. I've seen up to 4 Notre Dame players get slated to go in the first round next year. And there was another one from, and I think it was from Sporting News, where he didn't do a mock draft. I actually liked how this guy did it. I think it was Sporting News. I could be wrong. Might have been College Football News. But instead of doing a mock draft, he just said, here's my 32 top players for the draft next year. I mean, that's kind of first round. He had 4 Notre Dame players in it, and 3 of them were in the teens. It was actually the 3 in a row. It was Michael Mayer, Isaiah Foskey, and Brandon Joseph all in a row. He had Jarrett Patterson 32nd. That's kind of what happens. You're going to have a small draft class when all your best players come back. With the exception of Kyle and Kyren, there weren't any impact players for Notre Dame that left. There's good leaders, tough kids, great kids even, but not great players, not the best players. And so I think that's a big factor. And it also sets Notre Dame up, Ryan. So we had talked, hey, Ryan, I want you to do a 2023 draft article. And as we're going through all the names, it's like, dude, I'm going to have to turn this into 2 different articles. There's too much here, because the potential for next year's draft class is huge. So let's just quickly kind of go over it, Ryan. And we're going to talk about the guys that we kind of view as potential first-round picks and a couple wild card guys, or how this year is going to impact it. And you start to see that this could end up being, if Notre Dame is good this year, the kind of team we think they're going to be, they're going to have the most guys picked since the early 90s, which the most Brian Kelly ever had was 9, and that was a year ago, which was a good draft class. 9's a lot. I mean, I think they tied for 3rd. I think Ohio State and Georgia both had 10. I think is the only ones that were ahead of them last year. So 9 is a lot. And they've had some 6s and a 7, but they haven't had more, I think next year's class has a chance to be even bigger than that. So let's kind of go over that, Ryan. Let's preview the potential 2023 draft. And I think there's 2 guys at the very top that have to be part of the conversation. And the first one is Michael Mayer, the tight end. Now, I don't think it's going to be a given that he's going to be perceived as the number 1 tight end, as we're already seeing with some of these people that obsess over Eric Gilbert for some strange reason. But Michael Mayer, to me, I have a hard time looking at anyone right now and saying, I'm going to take you seriously if you don't have Michael Mayer projected as a first-round pick next year.
Yeah, I mean, he hits every threshold that you would want at the position, right? He's 6'4.5", he's 250 plus pounds. He's got a little bit of length to him. He's incredibly physical. I mean, I saw a picture of him when he was still at Covington Catholic, Brian. I'd never seen his picture before. Like, this kid looked like he almost an NFL player when he was in high school, man. Like, it was pretty insane. So he's obviously got a frame to be that type of dude. He's got a big catch radius. He wins above the rim. Physical player, both after the catch and before the catch. And you see big flashes in the run game. So I think that you could honestly have a conversation with someone about Kyle Pitts for a second and say, like, yes, Kyle Pitts is the best receiving tight end that we've saw come out in some time. But you could also say that Michael Mayer might be the best all-around tight end that may be coming around in some time, because he just does everything so well. So, yes, I agree. And people are going to bring up Eric Gilbert, and they're going to bring up, there's a couple of Utah kids next year, and there's, going to be the miscellaneous players. but Michael Mayer is the best all-around tight end in college football. And for a team in Notre Dame that has historically produced the tight end position as well as anyone, NFL draft-wise, I mean, he just had the best season that a Notre Dame tight end has ever had in terms of yards, catches, and touchdowns. So I think that he is the number. I would say that he and Foskey, which I know we're going to talk about next, they're the guys that I look at Notre Dame and I say those guys could be top half of the first round type of players, like somewhere in the top 16, 20 picks, like somewhere there. I think it's safe with a guy like Michael Mayer because I just think that he's been ready to go to the NFL since almost his freshman year. Like he was such a good player.
Yeah.
I think he could have competed in the NFL after his freshman year. Like, not saying he would have been the player he's going to be next year, obviously, because there's development that needs to happen. But this kid he's the real deal, man. He's the real deal. Top tight end in college football.
I think the thing for me too that I like that makes me feel like Michael Mayer is going to have a chance to really rise up the draft boards is that he's the opposite of what we were referring to earlier when we talked about Kevin Austin. Is, you know, when Michael's getting interviewed this spring, he's talking about like, I just want to get better. And as soon as Coach Parker came in, he starts talking about like, I'm doing this. And then Michael kind of joked. He's like, geez, coach, I thought I was pretty good last year, you know, but he was joking because his next comment was, he's like, but that's what I want. I want someone's going to come in and push me and say, yeah, okay, you were good last year, but you need to be better. You can be better. And I think that was Jarrett Parker walking in and saying, I need to make a statement. And if you walk in and you look at your best player, an all-American caliber player, and you say, that's not good enough, that sends a statement to the rest of your roster, the rest of your depth chart that says, if Michael's going to get criticized for how he played, you know I'm going to get criticized. So I better step up and hear what coach is saying and start to work to get better. But the more important thing is Michael embraced it. And when I've talked to people, you know, that are connected to the program in some way, shape, form, or fashion, they say that wasn't just interview talk, that Parker is constantly pushing and I say pushing and challenging. I'm talking about from a coaching standpoint. Like that's what you should be doing. And that Michael wants it. He wants to be better. And I've heard this spring that he has been an absolute monster for Notre Dame. Like, I mean, people are saying, I mean, you should hear the things that people at Notre Dame are saying about Michael Mayer. And it's not, look, I hope the people that I talk to that I listen to, that I would actually feel comfortable repeating what they're saying, are not people that tell me everybody's awesome, right? Like I don't listen to those people. I listen to them, but I don't take what they say with a grain of salt. That when you hear the word uncoverable, it's exactly what we saw in the spring game. I mean, DJ Brown has perfect. It was Clarence Lewis has perfect coverage on Michael, and he just snatches it like it's nothing. So to me, I do think the production is obviously there already. He's already broken every Notre Dame single season receiving record. If his game improves, especially as a blocker, I think there's no question not only is he going to be a first-round pick, he could be a top half of the draft. I'm sorry. Michael Mayer right now is a better player than TJ Hawkinson was coming out of Iowa, in my opinion. Projects to be a better player than what TJ Hawkinson was.
Especially when they were sophomores. Like, it's no conversation.
That's why I'm going to say, like, projects to be what he was as a top 10 pick. So I'm not saying he's better right now than TJ was in his last year at Iowa. I'm looking at their relative careers, and then you project him. I think he's going to be a better player than TJ Hawkinson was. Now, will the two Iowa guys not playing well hurt Michael Mayer? No, because most NFL teams aren't that dumb. And, especially when you get past 13, 14, 15, you start looking at better organizations that don't often pick in the top 10. So I definitely think Michael Mayer is going to be a high draft, barring injury or, obviously something bad happening. You never know, but hopefully that doesn't happen, but he's going to be a first round pick next year.
I know the mock draft that you were talking about, they were talking about in the thread. And I saw the same thing you messaged me this morning about the speed concerns. Do you have athletic concerns with Michael Mayer? I don't. Right. And I watched more clips of his highlights this morning just to be like, no, I'm not worried about his athleticism at all. Personally, that's just me, though. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. When I hear people talk about his speed, it's like speed relative to what? You know what I mean? Like what relative to Kyle Pitts? They're completely different players. And it's like saying I'm worried about Derrick Henry's agility compared to Tyree Hill or something. I mean, some player that plays a completely different game than him. And it's some of the stuff you read and it is just silly, in my opinion, just absolutely silly. And so I just, some of the stuff I just look at Ryan and I just kind of got to shake my head sometimes. But every other mock draft has had him going no lower than like 25th, which I think is reasonable. I mean, I think he'll be higher, but like 25th for a tight end. I mean, Tyler Eifert had 2 back-to-back great years, and he went like what 21st, 22nd, something like that. Because tight end isn't a position that you necessarily are going to see unless it's a freaky guy like a Kyle Pitts. You're usually not going to see tight ends get picked that high, like top 5 to 7. And so I could see him falling out of the top 10 just for similar reasons that Kyle Hamilton did, positional value. But to me, he's going to be coveted. And here's the other thing: you have no off the field concerns with Michael Mayer, none. And so that's another thing to factor in when you're looking at some of those other comparisons, in my opinion. There's another guy.
Yeah, you got to think that he's going to test really well too. As far as like the one thing that surprised me about Michael Mayer is I thought for as big as he is, I mean, he's over 250 pounds already, is going into his junior year. But man, I thought he changed direction really well. Like he runs routes, and I would be very surprised if he doesn't run a really good short shuttle, 3 cone. Like I think he changed direction really well.
I mean, he makes guys miss. I mean, we've seen him how many times make guys miss. Like I don't. You're like they act like he's like some lumbering straight ahead tight end, and I don't see that. I think that's, to me, I'll just be honest, I think that's lazy analysis because you don't see him get the ball thrown to him a lot. That's a usage problem. There's been plenty of times we've seen Michael Mayer get the ball and run, and so yeah, that guy can run for that size, right? And so I just felt it was honestly somebody trying to, like, I don't know, maybe take a stance that's unpopular to create conversation, maybe, perhaps, or someone who just looks for the wrong things and doesn't understand their own bias when they're evaluating things. There could be a lot of different reasons, but it was a bad mock. But it was an outlier. Every other one has had him pretty. I've seen a couple that had him in the top 10. And again, I put very little value other than they're fun conversation starters is what mocks are at this time of the year. Because you never know what's going to happen. Ryan, I know you, like last year, you had Carson Strong going really high. Well, how can you know that he's going to have a degenerative knee problem that comes up a year later that people are not going to want to take a chance on him for, and so which then creates problems with his game that didn't exist before. There's all things like that can always pop up, and you can't force, like, I'm going to foresee. I love Carson Strong's film, but I mean, he's going to, it's just part of the deal. It's just part of the deal. So anything other than anything like that coming up, I see Michael Mayer being picked high. Another guy that I think has a chance to be a high draft pick next year is Isaiah Foskey. There's a chance he could have snuck into the first round this year if he would have come out, if he would have tested well. I think probably late first, second round pick. Next year, it's not as deep of an edge class as this one was. With another year of production under his belt, again, assuming he stays healthy, this is a situation where he's a guy that's gonna have a chance to be a very high pick. And I think he actually has a higher ceiling in the draft than Michael Mayer, not necessarily because he's a better or worse player. It's just the positional value. So a big year from Isaiah Foskey, coupled with him going out and putting up good numbers, and from a testing standpoint. I mean, we saw Trayvon Walker go from would you say it's fair to say that Trayvon Walker's draft projection going into this offseason was similar to what maybe Foskey's would have been coming into this year's draft, like, late first, early second?
Yeah.
Then what happens? He goes to the combine and he blows it up.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden he's the number 1 pick, and so Foskey can have way more production. And if he can test well, and the other thing too is a lot like Michael Mayer. Part of the reason Isaiah Foskey came back is he knows his game can and needs to get better, and especially an emphasis on being a better run defender and advancing his pass rushing moves. Isaiah had like 2 moves last year. He had the power move, and then he had the quick jab, and then outside move. He didn't really have a third move, and his second move wasn't even really used that much. He just was so much better than everyone he went against week after week after week that he was able to still put up big time numbers. And I was watching USC game the other night, Ryan, and there's, I mean, just his first sack comes off the edge, beats the kid off the edge with a speed, gets his inside arm, just rocks the kid back because he's super long. As he's driving the tackle back, he takes his right arm and swipes the ball out of Keaton Slovis's hands. There's going to be a lot of film like that on him next year. Tied for the nation lead in forced fumbles this year. And some of them were huge. I mean, the Cincinnati forced fumble was a game changer. I I mean, Cincinnati's driving, about to go up 20, at least 20-0, maybe 24-0 ball game. Instead, they get the strip sack. Drew White picks it up, runs it back. Notre Dame punches it in, and all of a sudden, a potential 24-0 game turns into a 17-7 game. That allowed Notre Dame to somewhat get back in the game for 5 minutes. But it was a big moment. You look at the Oklahoma State game. Cowboys are getting ready to put the game away in the fourth quarter, and he has that huge not strip sack. He ripped it out of a guy that was running, and it gives Notre Dame a last bit of life. So I could see him, if he continues to grow as a player and test well, of being a potential top 10 pick next year. And we haven't seen a Notre Dame defensive end go in the first round. You and I were talking about this yesterday, since Ronaldo Wynn, I think, is in either 98 or 99. It's been a long time. That's going to help Notre Dame on the recruiting trail a ton if Isaiah Foskey can be a high pick next year. Just like having Kyle Hamilton help them get Peyton Bone and a Don Schuler. They're already recruiting D-end well. If they can have a guy like Foskey break out and be a first-round pick, things could get really, really interesting moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Ronaldo Wynn thing for a second, man. I was like, flashback to the Washington Redskins team, right? With Clinton Portis and all those dudes back in the day. So, yeah, it's so the thing about Isaiah Foskey is when you're evaluating the edge position, which obviously he plays, defensive ends, I think he can do things as a stand-up, but like he's a majority 4-3 defensive end, hand in the dirt type of player. Oh, sorry, Brian, you were on mute and Jules was going crazy in the background. My apologies.
I was talking about how bad she wants Isaiah Foskey to be a first-round pick next year. So, yeah, apologies.
Nope. Yeah, no, that's my fault for everybody out there. But like I was saying, I mean, for the defensive end position, we always talk about unteachables a ton from the scouting side of everything, right? So this is you can't teach 6'5", 260, that frame that I think, I put into an evaluation on him this morning that I think he could hold another 10 to 15 pounds easy. Like he's a clean 260 pounds, long arms. I mean, we're talking 34, 35-inch arms, in my opinion, maybe somewhere in the Trevon Walker type of conversation. So this kid is a true 4-3 defensive end, hand in the dirt, let the shackles go, long arms, incredible body to work with. And then he is a really, really explosive player. Yeah. I'm not sure that I would say he's the most bendy player of all time, but he has got the first step and the explosiveness to really threaten the outside track. And that's going to leave you up for the ability to, like you said, he's got the stab rip right now working a little bit, but let's add a club rip. Let's add some inside moves. Let's add the counter game to the arsenal. It's evolving, right? I think the one thing that we need to remember with Isaiah Foskey is a lot of programs were recruiting him as a tight end coming out of high school, right, at De La Salle. So it wasn't even like he was this. I mean, I just did some research, Brian. Like he was a 200-something recruit by most publications. Like he wasn't a guy that was like this top 100.
Most people projected him to be a tight end. It was Clark Lee and Notre Dame are the ones that convinced him to play defense. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So I think that when you combine all those unteachables with the improvement that he's had over the last couple of years, because I think one thing that people don't remember is that this was his first year as a starter, right? Like he was a rotational player in 2020. I think he had like 4.5 sacks, 5 sacks, somewhere in that ballpark as a part-time player. But this is still an evolving player. This is not a finished product, which I think if you're saying this past year, which I agree with, that after his 14.5 tackle for loss, 11 sack season, that he could have went late first round or early second, which I agree with you. If you're talking about him projecting to take that next step, add moves to the arsenal, get even stronger, get even more explosive, then why can't he have an Aiden Hutchinson type of rise? Why can't he be a top 10 pick? I mean, the class is going to be a little different next year because there's going to be a couple quarterbacks at the top in theory.
That's going to be a key. It's going to be a better quarterback class. Barring injury, you've got 2 top 5 picks at quarterback most likely next year.
Right.
For sure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, but even that kind of considered is you have Will Anderson from Alabama, who's a stud. Everybody knows about that. But why can't he be the second guy? Why can't he compete with Miles Murphy from Clemson to be the sec defensive end off the board? Why can't that conversation happen? I think it can. He has to take a step forward, obviously. But at worst, even if he stays the same, this kid's still a potential first-round pick.
Right.
Like, it just has too many tools that people are going to they're going to lose their minds over a little bit.
I think you brought up Aiden Hutchinson. As a freshman, he had 15 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. Sophomore, 10 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss. Good season. Got hurt last year in 2020. Only had 15 tackles in 3 games. And then this year he comes out and has 16.5 tackles for loss and 14 sacks in 14 games, and he becomes the number 2 overall pick. You talk about, Isaiah Foskey not being overly bendy. I'll be a little surprised if Isaiah Foskey's numbers don't match or surpass Aiden Hutchinson's in most athletic categories. That's just my opinion. And he's definitely going to be longer than Aiden Hutchinson. So correct. There's no reason with a big year he can't come out and be that. And the nice thing is he's going to have other guys around him to take some of that heat off, especially if a guy like Riley Mills can have a breakout. And, we've talked a little bit about him this weekend, you and I, and he's another guy that, is a potential breakout player. And if he breaks out, it takes a lot of that pressure off of Isaiah Foskey, because he's also going to have Jason Adamiola on the inside. And again, when we talk about why did Notre Dame only have 2 players picked, you look at a guy like Jason Adamiola. He gets drafted this year if he comes out. Now, I don't know if it had been 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. I don't know. He would have been drafted, just like Foskey would have been, just like Michael Mayer would have been if he was draft eligible, but he wasn't even draft eligible. Just like Jarrett Patterson would have been picked this weekend if he would have come out. So there's plenty of guys that were. Go ahead.
I wonder how high Michael Mayer would have went this year if he was draft eligible after his sophomore year. Because, Trey McBride, who I'm a big fan of, but he only went in the 50s as the first tight end off the board. I'm curious. It's something we'll never know. But
I think if he was draft eligible, he'd have still gone second round. I think he'd have been the number 1 tight end picked, and here's why. Because I think it would have been a projection thing. Because Trey McBride was, a 4-year player, right, at Colorado State?
Yep.
I think they would have looked at it and said, this guy's already pretty good, and he's only a sophomore. I think they would have projected, which is why I'm glad that young guys aren't in the draft. They already do enough projection with 3, and then I don't want to turn it into the NBA. I hate the NBA draft. I used to love the NBA draft. I hate it now because you're like, that guy averaged 9 points last year and he's 3rd overall pick. Like, what is going on right now?
It's funny.
So I think Jason Adamiola is another guy that now I don't know positional need and size. There's some things that say I don't see him, barring him just having a monster season and testing really well. I don't see him being a 1st-round pick. I think his objective next year is to jump into day 2, round 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the key. The talent is there. The quickness is there. He's really long, powerful hands. What he needs right now is he needs to do a little better block destruction, right? He needs to finish at the ball better. I think those are the 2 things, because that equals production. If the block destruction can become a little bit more consistent, the get off becomes a little bit more consistent. Now, get off meaning not that he doesn't try, but I think sometimes he doesn't time the snap as well as maybe he could. And he's like, if you go back and look at the sack he had on the first play of the game against USC, he actually got a late jump, but he just beat the guy so bad he's still able to make the sack. That's how talented Jason is.
Yeah.
Right. And so if he can just continue to kind of take that final step, I wonder if sitting out this spring is going to help him. And this may sound crazy, but Jason's had 1 million reps. He doesn't need more spring reps. I wonder how him sitting back and just watching guys play, watching Coach Washington coach, watching Al Golden coach, listening to things they're teaching other players might not help him see the game a little bit differently. Like, oh, okay, like, you know what? Like, if I do this, then I can, I think it could help him. I really do. And knowing Jason, he's not the kind of kid that's going to be sitting back, starting up random conversations, not paying attention to practice. He's going to be locked in. So as long as he's healthy and the production improves, I think he's another guy with a chance to be at the very worst early day 3 pick. But I think he's a guy that'll have a chance, again, especially if Notre Dame is really good next year, a chance to be a day 2 guy at some point.
The NFL loses their minds over interior rushers, right? Like they lose their mind over that right now, because you'll ask any quarterback in the NFL who has played in the NFL, they'll say they'd rather deal with edge pressure than interior pressure.
100%. Yep. That's not NFL quarterbacks. That quarterback's at any level.
True. Fair point.
Any level.
Yeah.
I can, there's so many things I can do as a quarterback against the guy coming off the edge. I can spin out. I can step up. I can slide to him. A guy coming right in my face, there's nowhere for me to go. Right. It's like, there's nowhere for me to go. And he's going to get on me quicker than a guy from over there is.
Sure is.
So you're 100% right. And it's like, because I was going to ask you about this, Ryan. There was only 5 D tackles considered, like, ranked, guys viewed as D tackles, pure interior guys were taken in the first 5 rounds. But a lot of that was because you look at a lot of those guys, there weren't a lot of interior guys that profiled as pass rushers, to your point.
No.
And that's what Jason can bring to the table if his product, like he had a lot of pressures last year that didn't end in sacks, which I don't know if NFL teams care as much about sack numbers. It's the consistency of, can you get off to the quarterback more effectively? Can you finish when you're there? That's more of what I care about. Is there were times where he was there and he should have finished but didn't. And if he can improve that, the numbers are going to jump, because it's not so much he's got to have 10 sacks. It's can he consistently collapse the pocket up the middle? And there's going to be times this year where Jason's going to be coming off against a tackle in a 5 technique. That's what he did on the first sack against USC. They were actually in a 3-down front. He was lined up in a 5 technique and beat the right tackle. It wasn't even so. I mean, that kind of versatility is also something, because now if you're a 3-down, if you're a 3-4 team, you can look at him as a 5 tech with his body type and his length and all that. So I think that versatility, the ability to fit in as a 3 technique and a 4-down, but a 5 technique and a 3-down is also something that should help Jason next year.
I think athletically, he's going to really pop for NFL teams, right? Like they're going to look at the type of player that he is, the first step quickness he has, the flexibility. The biggest thing that I think about him, Brian, is I remember going back to the Alabama game from 2020. He's got such good balance, man. He's got such good flexibility. Like he just never seems to be on the ground ever. And that's a really good thing for a defensive lineman. Like that means that you're not getting in bad situations, right? So he has all the makings of an interior rusher. You would like him to see finish a little better. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But like you said, the NFL teams are more worried about pressure than they are just raw sack numbers. Like that can be very misleading sometimes. I mean, there's guys that have gotten big contracts because they have like a 10 sack season. I think of Kyler Fackrell that played with the Green Bay Packers. He had a 10 sack season. Everyone's like, wow, he's so good. And then they're like, oh wait, no, he's actually not. They're all cleanup sacks. It's not as translatable. So I think that he has the potential to go somewhere on day 2 in the perfect world. If he takes the next step, he finishes a little better, a little more consistent as far as his block destruction. Like you said, the talent is there, because the only big knock the one big knock that's going to be on him is that he's not the biggest guy in the world, right? He's 280 something pounds. And that's just what he's going to be. I don't want to see him 300 pounds. I think that's going to take the quickness from him. He has to be a true 3 tech, a guy that's going to work gaps. He needs to be in a attack style system. Not going to ask him to 2 gap. You're going to ask him to take the shackles off and go. So I like him in that instance. I think that he has upside to that degree, but he has to take it up even a bigger step. He took a huge step this past year, but now next year is really where you're going to see him hopefully take that even better step. Could he be one of the best defensive tackles in next year's class? Because we know that there's going to be Brian Brissy. You like Tyler Davis. I know you mentioned from Clemson a little bit. There's some other guys.
But he's a different type of player for me than Jason. I mean, they're different players. I like him if like you're a team that needs a guy that can come in, provide some size, like be stout against the run, be a decent pass rusher. They're completely different players to me. I think Jason is more of that attack. I need a disruptor. I'm getting after the quarterback. If you're looking for an Aaron Darnold type of player, I'm not saying Jason's Aaron. I'm saying like there's different types of D tackles. There's the team that's looking for Jordan Davis. That team's not going to draft Aaron Donald. The team looking for Aaron Donald isn't drafting Jordan Davis, right? That's kind of where I'm from. But they're different players. But yeah, I agree. He's gonna have a chance to be as long as the medicals check out. And again, my understanding of the surgery on his shoulder is it's something he could have rehabbed, but both sides, Notre Dame and the Adamiolas, decided, hey, let's just get it cleaned up. And, he doesn't need the work this spring necessarily. Let's get it cleaned up. And then there's less risk of it becoming an issue that plagues him during the season. So, and then by the time you get to next year's combine, he's going to be over a year removed from the surgery. So I expect that to not be a problem. But yeah, the production's got to get there, Ryan. The consistency of production has got to get there. And this is his first year with a lot of snaps too. That's the other thing. Like he was getting 200 some snaps a year his first 3 years, which I still find insane. There was some way more opportunities he should have played. So I think that's going to help him a little bit too. And then being able to look, there's negatives to not playing this spring. I think one of the positives is Jason's going to be fresh. He doesn't need let's be honest. He's a senior. He's going to be his 5th year guy. He doesn't need the work. Right. I think it's better for the team that maybe he does. It's not good that he had the surgery, but you get the point that I'm making. Like he's not going to miss out because he wasn't out there. As long as he can get the strength back up and all that, I don't care that he didn't practice. And if anything, I think it's better for the team and it's better for him because, again, he's going to be fresh. He played a lot of snaps last year for the first time in his career. Yeah, I think he's going to be fresh.
Well, that's the thing about the 2 defensive linemen that we've talked about, right? Is that they're the old guys. They're the guys that everyone's talking about, they're still only 1-year starters, each of them.
Right.
They can both take their game to a much higher level.
Right.
They are not finished products, which I
No.
think gives you that hope, that projection is still there. I mean, like
Yeah.
Michael Mayer, I think it still take a huge step forward, but also he's had 2 years of production. So maybe he does plateau and what he was last year is about as good as he's going to be. I don't think that's the case, but I'm just to illustrate the fact that I think guys like Adamiola and Isaiah Foskey still have another tier up. Like they're not near their ceilings, in my opinion.
There's we're going to get to Jarrett Patterson in a second, but there's another defensive lineman that I think is another tier 2. And the other night, I could not sleep the other night, Ryan. I had so much going on in my head. I was like, okay, I'm break down some film. So I popped in some USC film from last year. And I just kept saying to myself, like, there's no way Justin Adamiola is not going to get drafted next year. Like, I'm just watching this kid. I'm thinking the teams are going to look at him and they're going to be like, that kid starts for a lot of teams. So a lot of teams that kid starts for. The problem for Justin is he's more of a Viper type in his body, is more of a Viper type, and there just happens to be this dude who could be a top 10 NFL draft pick next year playing in front of him. If Isaiah Foskey wasn't around, Justin Adamiola is going to have 10 sacks next year. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And from what we're told by different sources, there's a chance they're going to try to find more ways to get those two on the field together next year, especially against some of the teams that are a little bit more up tempo or throw the football. So he's another guy I look at and say, because he's got to finish better at the quarterback too, but he has a knack for winning. And, he's not the biggest guy, but he's long. He's longer than he is tall. He's 250. He's not huge. He's a guy that's an edge player, but we've seen him drop into coverage. We've seen him line up at middle linebacker in different looks and move and jump into coverage. So, that 3-4 outside linebacker role, I think would fit him very well in the NFL. And he's a guy that has phenomenal hands as a pass rusher. And if he can kind of take that jump this year, don't be shocked if he's not picked next year too, as a day 3 guy and an earlier day 3 guy. Because again, what are NFL teams looking for? I mean, Zach Bonito can do one thing, rush the quarterback, and he went in the second round, right? Justin Adamiola has already shown me that he can do more things better than Zach Bonito. If he can show me that he can rush the quarterback, Nick Bonito. Yes. If he can show me that he can rush the quarterback at somewhat similar level, there's going to be teams that are going to be looking for him, even though he may not be a starter next year. Because like I said, Nick Bonito, I watched his film, Ryan, and he can do one thing. I mean, they drafted him to do one thing. In the second round, they drafted him to do one thing, rush the quarterback. Justin Adamiola can do a lot more than one thing. And he plays with a motor. He is when the ball snap, that's a hungry dude, and he plays with a chip on his shoulder. So my bold prediction for next year is that Notre Dame has 3 defensive linemen get drafted. I'm not saying where, but they'll have 3. I think Foskey and both Adamiolas end up getting drafted next year. That's my prediction. It's my bold prediction. Am I nuts?
No, it's not nuts. I mean, and then the next question is, and I know we'll probably talk about that in a little bit, is what if Riley Mills has a massive season and he's on that conversation list? I'm not saying that he would declare, but like
I think he'd probably come back for one more year, just like Isaiah did. I think that here's can I say something else real quick about that right there?
Sure.
If Isaiah ends up being a top 10 pick next year, even top 15 pick next year, combined with what just happened with Kyren and Kevin, I think that's such great evidence for the rest of the players to say, hey, look, when we tell you need another year, trust us. I think that Marcus Freeman also is going to be a guy, and his staff are going to be people, especially with Al Golden as a defensive coordinator. Hey, look, buddy, I've been in the NFL the last 6 years. Let me tell you, you got a chance to do something, but right now, here's what we need to do for you. I'm just going to tell you right now, the players trust Marcus Freeman more than they ever trusted Brian Kelly. That's not a shot at Brian Kelly. It's just a reality. And if they say, hey, look, you need to come back, then there's going to be, especially now with Al Golden, I think it's going to be beneficial. So I think even if let's say Riley has 10 sacks this year, it's a heck of a breakout. He's still going to be their 3rd best defensive lineman. And the pitch is going to be come back next year, be a senior, just like Isaiah did, who had 11 sacks, and look what happened to him. He was a borderline first-round pick that now just made himself $9 million more because he jumped up 15 spots in the draft, right? And I think that's what we would see him do. And I think but I think part of that is like if Foskey ends up, let's say he doesn't have a good year and he gets drafted lower, then it could have the opposite effect. But right. I think if Foskey does what we think he's capable of, combined with what we just saw from Kevin Austin and Kyren Williams, they're going to have a 2-year window where players are going to be a little bit more, okay, coach, I trust you when they say you need to come back. So, those are kind of where I'm at for that one. So I think those 3 guys are going to get picked, in my opinion.
I mean, to your point, the NFL values pass rush so high. So Justin Adamiola, that with the hand usage he has and the plan that he has as a pass rusher, I think that NFL teams are going to value that tremendously. Probably a late round pick is like I don't think that he's a guy that is going to test tremendously well. I don't see him being that guy that's going to jump off the screen in that department. But Brian, could you imagine if
Who's
you
this?
could?
Who are you talking about?
Justin Adamiola.
Yeah.
Justin. Yeah. Could you imagine if you could kind of combine him and Isaiah Foskey? That is a number 1 overall pick. If you give Isaiah just kind of the hand usage and the consistent plan, that would be just
talking about the feel, right? The advanced
the feel,
yes.
the nuances,
yes.
the nuances of the pass rush. Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. If Isaiah wants to improve his game, just watch more Justin. I mean, really. I mean, think about that, because that's something that Mike Elson did a lot of great things in Notre Dame. This is not he's gone now, let's bash him. No, nothing but respect for Mike Elson. But the one thing he never did, he never really taught anything advanced from a pass rushing move. It was very controlled. There was 2 things. Like Notre Dame's players as good as any in the country at getting leverage, getting that hand up and driving the guy back. They were great at that. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't ever a counter off of that, or very, very few. The Adamiolas have a few more pass rushing moves because they came in with some of that, and they have a guy they work with in the offseason that would teach them those advanced things. Al Washington is my understanding is teaching more advanced stuff, and I think that's going to be a huge thing. But yes, you are correct. If Isaiah Foskey could kind of adopt some of the things that, and I'll say something else. Isaiah plays hard. I think there's another level for him to get to. This isn't a thing like, oh, he's inconsistent, takes plays off. I would never say that Isaiah takes plays off, but I think in year 2 as a starter, maybe he realizes there's still another gear for me. And I think that's where having a guy like Justin Adamiola can be key. Is if you see him like, man, this cat, if these guys are getting to the quarterback, right? If Jason's getting to the quarterback, Justin's getting to the quarterback, Riley's getting to the quarterback, if Isaiah wants his, you know what? I better step up. And I think that's a good thing. I think that kind of internal competition brings out the best in everybody. Hey, Isaiah, if you want to have 15 sacks this year, you better take your game to another level, because Jason is closer to the quarterback than you are, and Riley's doing this, and Justin's doing this, and it could make it really fun. I mean, I'm not going to. Yeah.
If I was Coach Washington, I would tell Isaiah, go watch some DeMarcus Ware film. I want to see that fake spin get pulled out in a game, man. You know what I'm talking about? The little whoop, and then outside track move. Yeah. Because like body type wise, I was trying to think of comparisons, Brian, for Isaiah Foskey. And I was just like, maybe a Chandler Jones, maybe a DeMarcus Ware. Like that's what type of body that kid has, man. Right. Like just some freakish length to him.
Well, because you asked me, you say, how tall is Isaiah Foskey? And I'm like, listed at 6'5". Why? And then you showed me the picture of him with Eli and Peyton, and he's like head to head, like, with both of them, with his big old arms wrapped around both of them in a picture. And you're like, yeah, he's legit. And Clark Lee told me that. I interviewed Clark Lee a couple years ago, and he was talking about, this is when Isaiah was coming into Notre Dame. He's like, he said, we had this kid. I loved his film, but I hadn't met him yet. I think Elson had been out there and met him, but like Clark hadn't met him. He came in for a visit, and he said the kid walks through my office, and he's got like his shoulders are so broad, it's like he's almost touching both sides of the door. He's like, that's what an NFL football player is supposed to look like. I mean, and he's absolutely right. Now Isaiah was just raw. Right, he was a kid that was played at a system at Concord de La Salle, where it's like you're just going to kind of you're going to fit into the system and all that. And they had, had to convince he's a tight end and all. I mean, it was a huge coup by Notre Dame to get him, and then also convince him he's a defensive lineman, because they're not getting him if he's a tight end. If he's a tight end, he'd have gone somewhere out west. But they convinced him that he's a defensive lineman. It was a stroke of genius. And now he's going to. But this is also why you don't redshirt guys like him. He played 4 games in 2019. Why? That guy's not a 5-year player, right? So you could have got more out of him, but whatever. It is what it is. So he's got a chance. I want to bring up the super chat real quick from Christopher Morgan. Thanks, Christopher. Just started my 10-day birthday vacation today. No question today from me, except 406 people watching and only 86 likes. Hit that thumbs up, people. Agree with that. And happy birthday week. It's actually my birthday's coming up next week as well. So trying to do a couple planned things for that, but haven't heard back from some people. So we'll see how that goes. But I want to talk about Jarrett Patterson. Ryan, because I think Jarrett Patterson would have had a chance next year to be a first-round draft pick. Definitely a day 2 guy if nothing changed at Notre Dame. The fact that he's now going to get coached by Harry Hiestand and Chris Watt, but mainly Harry Hiestand this next year, to me, as long as he's healthy,
Yep.
I could definitely see Jarrett Patterson being the number 1 center in the draft next year. And number 1 centers, more often than not, do get picked in the first round.
Yeah.
Right? Would you say that's fair? So,
I mean, we saw this past draft. Obviously, Linderbaum went in the first round. The Cole Strange kid from Chattanooga was the 29th pick by the New England Patriots. Although he played guard mostly at Chattanooga, he also played center down in Mobile. So yeah, it's pretty. I mean, usually you see at least one center taken in the first round. If not, it's a very second round type of pick.
Because if you go back to 2013, let's actually go back to 2010. Pouncey went in the first round. The next year, there was nobody taken, but the centers were like Stefan Wisniewski, Rodney Hudson, right? Jason Kelsey went in the 6th round, right? So next year, nobody in the first round, but again, no names you would recognize. Travis Frederick went in the first round the next year. Weston Richmond was the highest guy picked at 43 the next year, just out of the first round. Cameron Irving goes 19 that next year. Ryan Kelly goes 18th the next year. Ethan Posick is the number 1 center pick the next year at 58. Again, not a great center class. The following season, there's 2 centers taken, and they went back-to-back. Frank Ragnow from Arkansas and Billy Price from Ohio State. The next year, Garrett Bradbury goes in the first round, and Eric McCoy from A&M goes 48th. Cesar Ruiz goes round 1 the next year. Last year, Landon Dickerson went 37th, just outside the first round. If it's not for him completely destroying his knee in the SEC title game, he's a first-round pick. Would you agree with that? The only reason he fell to 37 was because of the knee injury. And then, of course, this year, Tyler Linderbaum, who I think compares favorably to Jarrett Patterson from a style of play standpoint. More athletic than a mover, kind of guy. I think there's a lot of similarities there. I could certainly, and again, Cesar Ruiz was the 24th overall pick, 18th Bradbury, so I mean they're going from like 15 to 31 is kind of that range. I don't see him jumping into the top 20, but I could definitely see him being late 20s into the 31, 32 range if he's able to be healthy, because he's been a good player for a long time. I think having Harry Hiestand gives him an opportunity to be the best version of himself, which, let's be honest, that's the only reason he came back this year, because Jarrett Patterson this year would have been a day 2 pick. Now, his injury happened after he declared to come back. So it's not like he came back because of an injury. The injury happened later. Right. To me, there's no doubt, in my opinion, I could be completely wrong on this, that he's a day 2 pick if he comes out this year.
I would even take it one better. I mean, obviously day 2, we're talking about second and third round. I would find it hard to believe that he would fall out of the second round, because there just was not a center after Linderbaum this year where you were like, yep, that's a dude, because Patterson went back to school.
I did like the kid from Nebraska, though. But
Jurgens,
he only played.
I don't like him.
Potential-wise.
Sure,
but here's the thing, right? He's been playing offensive line for 2 years. That's it. You drafted him off potential. But here's my point. I'm trying to back up your point. Yeah. I liked Jurgens' potential, but here's why Jurgens went that high. Because there was nobody else. So you took a flyer on a kid with upside because there was nobody else like Jarrett Patterson. And then Luke Fortner's a nice player. I actually like Zach Tom, but again, he was drafted where he should have been drafted, 4th round. Right? There was nobody with Jarrett Patterson's experience plus talent that you take in the second round, which is why the Eagles were in a situation where they had to take a flyer on a kid that's got a lot to prove but has a lot of talent. That was my point was to back up what you're saying is that's why he's the second center off the board, because it was not a great center class. And so I do think Jarrett would have been. I'm just trying to be realistic, day 2, but now with a year with Harry under his belt, as long as the injury heals up, he's going to have a chance to be a very high pick. So now we've talked about 3 guys that we believe right now have legitimate chances to be top first-round picks for Notre Dame next year, and a couple other guys on the defensive line who we think will hear their name called. The big wild card for me, let's talk about this one, Ryan, the big wild card in next year's draft, and then we're going to talk about Brandon Joseph after that. The big wild card for me is Cam Hart. He is a really big question mark because he would have got drafted this year if he came out. in my opinion. It'd probably been day 3. Would you agree with that? He's probably day 3 pick, just not enough film, inconsistent, all that.
Sure.
And the shoulder injury. As long as the medicals check out, right? Because I always get nervous with shoulder injuries. As long as the medicals check out next year, if he can become a more consistent player from a technique standpoint, and he tests the way that I'm told he's going to test, he's a guy that could definitely be day 2, but with the right kind of year, especially if the pass rushers are what we think they're, because that's what it all plays on each other. If Foskey and the Adamiolas and Riley Mills all play better, guess what? That's going to be more chances for Cam Hart to make more plays. But I'm watching him against USC, and I'm like, he's sticking on Kyle Ford like it's nothing. Like Kyle Ford's running in in cement shoes. He's just moving so effortlessly. And then, of course, the next play, he'll kind of get too turned and have to stop and all that. It's a consistency thing. But he's another guy that if he tests really well, you're talking about a 6'2.5" guy that if he can run in the low 4.4s or high 4.3s, is going to be a really high draft pick. Because I think the film this year was good. At times, great. At times, that guy looks like he's only been playing corner for a year and a half. Right? I mean, is that fair? Right? But now next year, with continued better coaching, I mean, look, Mike Mickens and Marcus Freeman just put 2 guys in the first 4 rounds of the draft. I mean, Mike Mickens recruited Ahmed Gardner, coached him as a freshman All-American, 3rd-team All-American as a true freshman. I was with Mike Mickens coaching him. You know, we saw what he did with Nick McLeod. We saw what he did with Cam Hart in his first year. I'm excited to see what Cam Hart could do in this draft if he's able to be healthy and continue to become a more consistent player.
NFL teams go insane for length of the cornerback position, like absolutely just drool over it. But then when you combine the length that he has with the thought that he's going to run very fast, that's a different conversation. Those guys go early. I mean, Carlton Davis played at Auburn. I don't know if you remember him, Brian, the corner that's now with Tampa Bay, and he was a good player. He ran like 4.5 low, like 4.52 or 4.51, and he had pretty decent film at Auburn, but like he didn't locate the ball that well, but he had length and he had decent speed, and everyone's like 2nd round pick. And the NFL was right apparently on that, right? I mean, that's how people match up to those freak shows that we're seeing at wide receiver, you know, the Julio Jones of the world and DeAndre Hopkins and these guys, right? Like that's why you need that length and that athleticism. And he has it in bounds. And I actually think that he changes direction pretty well for his size too, because that would be a thing that you would kind of look at him and say, he's a little bit of a high cut kid, long. He's not going to change directions that well. I think it's sufficient. I don't think it's bad. And then the major thing that I took away from watching him this, a little bit this offseason is for a guy that's only been playing corner a couple years and has only started for 1 year, he's very physical in the run game for a guy that is that young. Like you don't usually see that convert turn into a really plus player in the run game. I mean, against screens, he blows things up.
And he's still learning to tackle. I mean, the perfect example is the play against Virginia Tech. He kind of got caught like, okay, do I lay him out? Do I form? And then he just kind of like, if that's the only play you saw, you're like, oh, former receiver. But you're absolutely, I mean, you see him come up on screens and quick throws. He's an aggressive kid. He's a physical kid. And the thing is, Ryan, I think there's some things out there too that if he can still be that player that you talked about this year after having shoulder surgery, that's going to be important too. Like he can't take a step back from that because of the shoulder. So that'd be another thing. But I think what a lot of fans maybe don't appreciate because he's so long, he is really fast. Really fast. There's a play, and was it the Florida State play where like Kyle Hamilton's running and then like from behind you see like Cam Hart like run right past him? There's times on some of those plays you're like, this dude can freaking scoot. And I don't think people understand it because he's so long, right? Like that's the difficult thing. Like it's hard to see a 6'2" corner because he eats up space. It almost looks like he's not even running. And next thing you know, he's running with a guy. So I think that's something too. Because some people may have like been taking like, wait, hold on, Cam Hart, low 4.4s, high 4.3s. Yeah. He's already running 4.4s at Notre Dame, right? What's he going to do when he gets 2 months to prepare with a specialist trying to train him to run as fast as possible? So, I think he's gonna test. I think really, 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 really well. I could be wrong, but I think he will. And the length is absurd.
The length, the speed, and then also the wide receiver background, the team's going to like that a lot too, right? Teams are going to
Mhm.
love that. Going to be like, oh, ball skills inherent. And I think that he needs to, get more comfortable playing in phase and using those ball skills more appropriately. But
Yes.
they're there. Like you can see it still
Good
there. It's just he's
experience
not
thing.
100% comfortable all the
Right.
time, kind of turning and because it's different. It's just a little different.
Yeah. That's gonna be the key for him this year, Ryan, is he's gotta show that he has made a jump in that regard. Like, he can't just be the same guy next year he was this year. He's gotta show a jump in those areas, and I think he will. I think Cam's gonna have a chance to really shoot up draft boards and be a good player. And again, high character, good student, great kid, great personality, comes from a great family. All the boxes are going to check with Cam too. Whereas you just look like one of the top draft targets for next year's draft. Just got arrested again today. The kid from Alabama, right? So
Eli Ricks, yeah.
you're not gonna have those issues with Cam. You're gonna be like, wow, great kid, works hard, was willing to move from one position to another, and didn't whine about it, complain about it, just did what he did, worked hard, did this, that, and the other. Sat the bench for a couple years, didn't get a lot of playing time as he was making the transition, didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't jump in the transfer portal. Kid put into work, and he worked hard at his craft, and now look at him, he's done this. All those things are going to check for Cam. And I think that's going to help him too. Because look, not that the NFL is going to be afraid to draft a guy because of lack of character, hence Sam Williams being picked as high as he did and some other guys that were picked in the draft. But at the end of the day, if a kid checks the physical boxes and he's a good kid, it's going to help. It doesn't hurt. It's, but it's going to help in my opinion. So that's the other factor in it.
I mean, you just had to turn on the Wisconsin film, right? Like I think one of the interceptions that Cam Hart had was a little bit of a gimme, but that one, it was either a slant or an in route where he ran the route. Yeah, it was in cut and he ran the route for the I mean, that stuff is just not normal, man. Like that's not ordinary stuff because then you're looking at that and you're like, not only did he change direction really well and he obviously he read the route incredibly well, but the fact that he's 6'2.5" doing that, like that's different stuff,
right,
man. Well, I think when I think he sees the game pretty well when he's, got his eyes back, right? Like when he's in zone. But I'm talking about when he's in man and we're working vertically, working down the field a little bit. If he's able to locate the football better and then unlock those ball skills, sky's the limit for Cam Hart. He's got starter upside on the next level just for that length and athleticism alone. Like it's all there for him.
Yeah. So that's just guys that played at Notre Dame this year. Right. And we wanted to go with them first to kind of point out, like, folks, like, look, if all the guys left that could have left, Notre Dame's draft class would have been at least double, more so. I mean, we just mentioned three guys. Jason gets drafted. I think Jarrett gets drafted. I think Isaiah gets drafted. And I think Cam would have got drafted. That's four guys right there. Right. And so if Avery Davis doesn't get hurt, he probably leaves and he might have a shot to get drafted. Because he's another guy that's going to test a lot better than people think. He's a 4-4 guy, production, et cetera, et cetera. He may be a round 6 or 7 guy. And he's a guy that's played corner and other things. So, you bring that special teams ability to the table. Brandon Joseph is a guy that's new to the Notre Dame roster. But again, someone who we're seeing a lot of people project as a first-round pick in this year's upcoming draft. And so he's a guy that has a chance to be another player that with a good season, Ryan, a strong season and good testing could be a guy that jumps. I expect the film to be there. My only question is just going to be because I haven't seen him a lot in person, is going to be how does he move, test as far as that's going to be my only thing that's going to determine whether, second round or first round. Because that's the thing is when you're not a freak like Kyle Hamilton at safety, you've got to have great film and you've got to test pretty well. And we saw that this year with like Lewis Seen, right? Didn't he have a pretty good
oh yeah, he ran 4.3s and like a 41-inch vert or something like that, like crazy numbers.
Yep. And he went 32.
Yep.
With a lot of film, right? So, but anyway, let's talk about Brandon Joseph because I know this is a guy that you thought could have been with another season like you had in 2020 and 2021. You thought he could have been a first-round draft pick this year.
Yeah, I had him in a first-round mock last summer because I was infatuated with this film from 2020. I mean, the first thing that pops off is I think he's got really good diagnostic skills. I think he has great eyes on the back end, good range, sufficient everywhere. I actually liked him in the slot a little bit in 2020 as well. I thought he did some nice things in man coverage. But the best thing about Brandon Joseph, in my opinion, is the ball skills are tremendous, man. Like, absolutely. Plays the football in the air about as well as you can find a safety. in college football over recent years. So guy that I have really liked for a couple years now, all of a sudden, but I expect big things from him. I think that he is a kid that I agree. I don't think he's going to be the greatest tester of all time. I keep comparing him to Jesse Bates. Like I just keep seeing Jesse Bates every time I see him play. He's got a little bit of that long, a little bit wiry frame. I wouldn't call him skinny, but like a little wiry to a degree, right? But Jesse Bates was like a 4.5 something 40-yard dash guy, 35.5-inch vert, somewhere in that ballpark. So he wasn't like an outrageous tester. I kind of see a guy like Brandon Joseph closer to that. But for me, like I just see incredible football IQ, incredible ball skills. I think it's all there, man. Like I think he's a true free safety type. Has played middle of the field, you know, for Northwestern. He's played in the slot for Northwestern, and we saw when we watched the Notre Dame practice, he was for the media availability. He was even playing a little bit in the slot. They got 3 safeties on the field, and they put him in as the kind of a big nickel type of role for him too. So I think he's got versatility. I think he's got ball skills, and the tackling is pretty good for the most part. There are some times where he just plays a little bit out of control, right? Angles aren't bad for the most part. They're usually pretty good, but there's just some times where he just seems to be moving a little bit fast. And that's going to be the thing about some guys that see the game so quickly. Sometimes they're going to be in spots maybe they shouldn't necessarily be in, right? Because they're just so intelligent on how to get there. But yeah, I like Brandon Joseph a ton. I think he can be a potential late first round type of safety. If not, I think he's a safe day 2 type of player if he returns to 2020 for him. Because again, those ball skills and that proactiveness on the third level, I think that's what you want in the safety in the modern game, and free safety especially.
So my question for you, Ryan, is what does he have to do in the offseason next year, pro day, combine, to jump into that round one? Because as we've seen, right, safeties are just not a high value position. You have to have film plus workout. So I don't think he has to do what Lewis Cine did, but what does he have to do, in your opinion, to kind of jump into that round on top of great film and great character, which he'll have? Again, another guy that checks the character boxes, right? What does he have to do, in your opinion, at the combine on top of having a great year to be a potentially first round pick?
As long as he has film like he did in 2020, like if he's able to get back to that type of film, I don't think it has to be anything outrageous. Like I said, I think it's got to be near Jesse Bates caliber film. I know Jesse Bates went lower than the first round, obviously, but I'm also saying that he has better film already than Jesse Bates ever had at Wake Forest. Like it's just a stylistic comp. So I think if he runs somewhere 4.5 to 4.55, 35 plus inch vert, somewhere in that ballpark, and all these short area stuff is just good. Like it doesn't have to be excellent. I don't think this kid has to be an elite tester, because I think he's going to win more off of his mind and ball skills than just pure athletic gifts. But if he goes there at the combine, he runs 4.47, then like that's a huge check. Like I don't need him to run 4.3 like a Lewis Cine did, because Lewis Cine is not a proactive football player near to the degree of a Brandon Joseph. He doesn't have the ball skills of a Brandon Joseph. They're different players.
Because you'd count him as more of an alley guy, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He could play from the roof. He got a little better there, but like for the most part, that guy is a headhunter. Like he wants to scream down, and he was
like that in high school too. He was a thumper in high school.
Yeah.
I liked him a lot coming out of high school. 99 problems BK81. Let's jump into some questions here, Ryan. Let's wrap this thing up with some questions. We have some draft questions, a couple of recruiting questions. We're going to focus mostly on the draft questions. But 99 problems with BK81 says James Cook being drafted 63rd overall, and he never was the guy at Georgia. Can Chris Tyree have a good enough year to be a second round pick? Cool. Cook is bigger, but not big, and Tyree is faster. Let me just say 2 real quick things in my opinion. Number one, James Cook was a part of that rotation for a few years. He had a lot of production, even though he was never the guy. He had a lot of production in some big games. So I think Chris Tyree needs to have a lot of production this year, but I think they're very different players. James Cook has some receiver in him because of that size, and so I just don't know if I think they're comparable players, in my opinion. Ryan, what say you on that?
Now, I was going to say the same exact thing. The difference between James Cook and Chris Tyree is that James Cook was also drafted that high because he has such high impact at receiver, right? Like he's a guy that literally played. There were times where they would flex him all the way outside and just run go routes with him. Like he's a different type of cat as far as in the passing game. So I don't think they're exactly comparable in that instance as well. Tyree, I could see a vision for Tyree, whether it's next year or the year after, depending whenever he chooses to come out, where he is somewhere in day 2. But I think it's more of the kid from Texas A&M now, the Devin Shane kid, you know him, Brian? Where it's just like they're not pass catching running backs, but they're guys that are just bolts of lightning, right? Like there are guys that are going to take a handoff, and if the gap integrity is not sound, they're going to take it the distance. James Cook is different. James Cook is fast. Chris Tyree's faster, but James Cook is, I mean, he could play in the slot. Like everyone kind of always wants to say, like, why don't they use Chris Tyree in the slot? Because he's not a slot comfortable type of player. James Cook is. James Cook can run routes inside, and that makes them just a completely different type of evaluation.
Agree. But again, if Chris Tyree can run like we think he's going to run and produce, he'll get drafted. How high? Let's just see him. Let's see him go through a year first and produce. I mean, that's the thing with Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph. We've seen these guys produce at a high level. We haven't seen that from Chris yet. I think the tools are there, but if we're going to be honest and objective about the draft, there's a lot Chris Tyree has to show before I start thinking about, can he be James Cook? Because James Cook, like you said, had multiple years of production. Tavis McKay asks, excluding Mayer, Patterson, Foskey, and Adamiola, who would you be most excited for draft stock-wise, and how high in the draft could they climb? Let's also take out Brandon Joseph, because I think we discussed that one a lot. So we talked about those guys. Who would you be most excited for draft-wise, and how high in the draft could they climb?
I mean, the easy answer is Cam Hart. We already went over that one a little bit. I mean, though, for me, Ryan, it doesn't really specify if it's 2023 or after. I'm looking forward to seeing how much of a jump Riley Mills takes this year. Because, again, would he declare? Probably not. But I'm curious to see if he's the next in line or if he's just a really good college player. Like, is he a guy that at 6'5", 280 plus is the next guy after Isaiah Foskey, like you kind of illustrated earlier? So I'm looking forward to seeing what his evaluation looks like after this season, because then it could be an interesting player to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. But for 2023, it would be Cam Hart for me.
I think Riley, for me, I expect him to be just a better player next year. Like when I look at him, I want to see him just be good next year. I don't need him to be dominant. I don't need him to play like a guy that might come out after this year. If he does, that's phenomenal. I just need him to be good. Just be a good, dependable player that occasionally flashes. Then go show yourself the following year. That's kind of more of my projection for Riley Mills. I'd say a guy that when you kind of look at different players and potentially rising up the draft boards and things like that, a guy that I'm very, very curious. You know who else I think will get drafted next year? We can talk about this. I think Bo Bauer gets drafted next year. You and I talked about this. Because in round 6 and 7, they're going to take a guy who's not a starter. I think Bo Bauer is going to run a faster 40 time than some people think. And he's a great special teams player. I could see him getting picked in round 6 or 7. I really could. Even if he doesn't start at linebacker next year, I really could see that. But at that same position, I still think, again, like Riley Mills, I think he's probably a year away from really being in the draft conversation. But I'm really curious if Maris Luafau can have the kind of year that makes us at least wonder if he has a decision to make after the year. That's one that I'm curious about. I don't think he could do enough in 1 year to really go be high enough of a draft pick to come out, but it'd be nice to kind of be a little nervous about that at the end of the year. I mean, those are good problems to have, right? You want to have those good problems because it tells you that a guy's having a great year. But he's the only other one that I could really think of. I mean, we talked about the Adamiolas. Braden Lindsey, that's the other one. I hope that a year from now, we're talking about where's Braden Lindsey going to be picked.
Yeah.
Because we know one thing, he's going to test incredibly well in the speed categories. Can his agility numbers be good? Can his testing numbers be good? But I just want to see that he's had a healthy year and that he's become a receiver, right? That's the key for me. Because he's another guy, Ryan, that, look, Braden's going to check a lot of the character boxes. There's no doubt about that. He's a really good kid, goes to class. He's just a really, really good kid. But can he check the football boxes? That's the thing. Can he stay healthy? Can he be a better route runner? Can he get off the line of scrimmage? Because at his size, if he's not better getting off the line of scrimmage next year, that's going to really hurt him because they're going to say, yeah, he's fast, but if you can't get off the line, you can't use your speed at this level.
Right.
We're drafting a bunch of 6'2" guys like, Zion McCullum in the 5th round and McCullum in the 5th round and Cam Hartz and guys like that. And you're 5'11" and a half and you don't know how to get off a press. Right now, I think that's going to change because he finally has a position coach, right? That knows how to teach those things. And from everything we saw in the spring, Ryan, I mean, you said this to me. I believe it was either you or Vince, but he looks like a completely different kid. I mean, just
Yeah.
physically, he has put on good weight, like he's put in the work. We had an intel report before the spring that they didn't even recognize Braden Lindsey from not just a size standpoint, because you still recognize him. A receiver, I hope a receiver doesn't get that big. That's a problem. But it's more of just the attitude. I'm hungry. Like that was some of the. I've had people at Notre Dame question that in the past. He likes playing. He loves playing football. Does he love football to the degree that he wants to put in the work to be the best he can be? That has been completely destroyed since January. I mean, nobody's talking to me about that anymore at Notre Dame. No, and in fact, they're saying the opposite. Like he's a completely different kid. That's what I wanted to hear, because that tells me he's going to be in the film room. He's going to be looking at his craft. He's going to be saying, hey, I'm not good enough here. I'm not good enough there. I need to get better at it. And he was the guy when you were talking and Vince were talking about, or no, as Vince was talking about, as when Chancey Stuckey's up there coaching somebody else up, you can see Braden in the back of the line, like practicing the moves that Stuckey's talking about. He's zeroed in. He's locked in. He's 8 people behind the coach, but he's back there mimicking him and trying to work on what he's doing. You got to love that. You got to love that, because that's the potential that I think a guy like Braden Lindsey has, because the speed and the big playability is going to be there. And man, if he can have a breakout year too, if we're talking about him being a potential drafted guy next year, that means this offense is going to be really good, really good. He could be that key, because we know Styles, we know Avery Davis, we know Mayer. If we're talking about Braden Lindsey being a guy that could get drafted next year, we just got done having a really fun year covering Notre Dame football. There's no doubt about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to mention Amaris Loifow to start, but I think Braden Lindsey is a really interesting evaluation, because we see every single year now there are these gadget-type players who get drafted very highly. I mean, Tutu Atwell last year, Wan'Dale Robinson in the second round this year. There's guys every single year. And I think even when you compare him to, obviously, Wan'Dale Robinson took his game to a completely different level as far as a receiver.
And 100 catches.
Final year. Yeah. Like he had a crazy year. But I mean, go look at Tutu Atwell's last year at Louisville. He only had like 40-something catches for like 600-something yards. Like he was not a great player. So if Braden Lindsey can get his production near there, and Tutu was 150-something pounds, only ran like 4.43 or something.
Wasn't he like 5'7" or something like that? Like
I think 5'9", but like
Yeah.
156 pounds or some crazy number like that. And he was drafted in the second round. So there's no reason to think that Braden Lindsey can't become a draftable type player. But obviously it's about consistency for him. I mean, he's going to test incredibly well, like you said. There's going to be some place where you're just like, wow, that's a different type of speed than on this roster at some spots, right? Like you're going to say that. But the whole thing has always been about consistency with Braden Lindsey. And he looked at that spring practice like a completely different player, like you said. I mean, he was snapping routes off. He looked confident in his skin. He was finishing through contact. Like it did not look like the Braden Lindsey that I was used to. And But again, the pessimist in me as a Notre Dame fan is I've been fooled about this a few times in my past. So
down, folks, BK PTSD.
That's it right there. Okay, make the t-shirt, man. Make it. I'll buy one.
I'll
buy one.
99 problems BK ain't one. That's perfect timing to bring up his thing, right? Get over that BK PTSD. It's a fair I'm just having some fun with you. It's a very fair thing. He's got to show it. B. Ryan, will Notre Dame have a second corner in 2022 that will be good enough to stop teams from avoiding Cam Hart and allow him to make plays and put together some impressive film? I have 2 comments to make, and I want to hear your opinions. Number 1, as an evaluator, I don't need to see you throw at a guy for me to know he's really good. That's a common, I think, thing that people mistake. There are certain things you're not going to be able to see on film if he's not tested. You can't see the ball skills and all that. But if I'm watching a guy just blanket a guy and completely shut off half the field, I don't need them to throw at him for me to say that guy's really good, right? That's point number 1. Point number 2 is the schedule this year. There will be teams that aren't going to be afraid of Cam Hart. Ohio State's not going to avoid Cam Hart. They're not. USC's not going to avoid Cam Hart. The nature of that offense, they're not going to avoid Cam Hart. Clemson's probably not going to avoid Cam Hart. Now that may come back to cost them, right? And that would but he'll have opportunities in some of the bigger games this year to prove himself, because Ohio State's not going to be like, oh, gee, we're afraid of Cam Hart. We're going to go at Cam Hart, and they will. Now, Cam Hart needs to be prepared for that and be ready to make plays when that happens. But there's going to be at least 2 teams on the schedule this year, Ryan, that are not going to avoid Cam Hart. And honestly, at the end of the year, those are going to be the games NFL teams are going to care most about anyway, as opposed to him locking down BYU, half of the field against BYU or UNLV or Syracuse for an entire game. First thing they're going to do when they start looking at Cam Hart, how do you do against Ohio State's receivers? How do you do against USC's receivers? And that's where we're going to look. And if he's not good in those games, but great in the other 10, guess what? That's going to hurt him. So he'll get chances next year, no matter what the second corner does, in my opinion.
Can I say something that people are going to find very weird for a second? NFL evaluators don't care about interceptions. They don't care about it. Last year in the 2021 NFL draft, J.C. Horn went top 10, who I was a huge fan of, by the way. No bigger fan than J.C. Horn in that cycle. He had 2 career interceptions, and both of them came in the same game against Bo Nix. I make this start. I'm Brian's boy, Bo Nix, by the way. But yeah, 2 interceptions in 3 years as a player at South Carolina. You know why he only had 2 interceptions in 3 years? Because no one threw at him. They were terrified of him.
Right.
And that's what the old 22, that's what the coach's angle shows you, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't care about as much. I mean, everyone wants good ball skills. Everyone wants to force turnovers. Yes, that is a big, big plus. What I'm telling you is that people are going to watch J.C. Horn's film and they're going to say, there's a reason they didn't throw at him that time.
Right.
They blanketed him. He's not open. Like, nobody's open. And they're going to have the same instance with Cam Hart. There is a reality where Cam Hart has 1 interception this year, and he is a lockdown first-round pick.
Right.
Like, you don't need 5 interceptions.
I would actually argue the fewer interceptions he has, the better he's playing.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the Kobe Bryant versus Ahmad Gardner thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kobe Bryant's going to have more ball production because nobody's throwing at Ahmad Gardner. I mean, that's just the kind of that's the short to it, right? And people are going to watch the film, and the best corners ever, and this one is back to JC for a second. It makes you like you get bored watching really good corners because nothing happens, right? They are terrified of them. And you know who else is the best corners, Brian? And this is a big point that I've always come back to. The best corners are the ones that can play man-to-man coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you have less interceptions, usually in one-on-one situations, in man-to-man coverage because your back's to the football? That's usually the occurrence, right? A lot of interceptions come in zone. A lot of them do because their eyes are back to the line of scrimmage and you can see the ball where it's going a lot earlier into the rep. So it doesn't matter from a ball production perspective if Cam has those big numbers. If he is the best corner on this team and they are avoiding him all year, the NFL will take notice of that. So I don't think it necessarily helps him 99 problems. But what I will say is I do expect cornerback to be it's going to be a better position opposite of Cam Hart because it was not great last year. We know that, right? You're going to expect Clarence Lewis to take a step forward. You're going to expect guys like Ryan Barnes to push for playing time, obviously. So I think that position will be better overall opposite of Cam Hart. But I don't think that if it is a lot better and teams start throwing at Cam Hart, I don't think that's necessarily exactly what's going to push him over the top as a draft prospect. That's just not the thing that usually indicates success.
And I'm looking at this here too. 2 of the best corners I've ever seen in my life, Deion Sanders and Champ Bailey. If I'm starting a team, that's probably who I'm starting with, right?
I loved Champ, man.
Yeah.
I love Champ.
And they both averaged fewer than 4 interceptions a year in their NFL careers. So, and you look at a guy like Rod Woodson, who ranks really high. Rod Woodson got a lot of picks later in his career and he was playing safety as well.
Right.
So now, where NFL teams care about interceptions and production on the ball is when you are thrown at.
Sure.
And that's not what we're saying. Like if teams are throwing at him a bunch and he only has 1 interception, that's bad, right? That's bad. Right. That's not what I just want to make sure people understand what we're saying is we're not saying if he gets thrown on 50 times and has 5 breakups and 1 pick, that's a great year. No, that's a terrible year. That's a bad year. We just don't expect that to happen. But that's what we saw this year. We saw him have, I think, 7 breakups and 2 picks, and he was thrown on, I think, like 50 times, right? That's decent production there. But 50 times is Pro Football Focus's number, and they'll count a freaking look screen behind the line of scrimmage as being thrown on. So it wasn't quite that many times. So just want to point that out as well, just as we kind of wrap that part of it up.
And last point is I don't want to throw too much shade at Trevon Diggs for a second, but Trevon Diggs had like 12 interceptions this year, and he wasn't very good. If we're going to be completely honest, there was a reason he had 12 interceptions. But yeah,
well, that's what's funny. He was all pro because of the 12 interceptions. But yeah,
so silly, man. He gave up over 1,000 yards in receiving yardage last year. Over 1,000 yards.
I'm trying to think, what was the most interceptions Deion ever had in a year? Was 7. He went 5, 3, 6, 3, 7, 6, 2, 2, 2, and this is in Dallas. 2, 2, 2, 5, 3, 4, 3, 2. It's because people stopped throwing at him. He had 9 6s.
We had a podcast. It was like a film breakdown one time, Brian, and it was Mike Haynes came in. Do you remember Mike Haynes played with the Raiders in New England, Hall of Fame corner? He was like, I had 8 interceptions as a rookie, and then I never had nearly as many again because people were like, why am I doing that?
That's very true. Very true. Very, very true. Okay, so let's get the last couple questions. We have another one from 99 Problems PK1. I know this question requires a lot of projection, but if 2023 version of Buchner were in this draft class, where would he have been selected? If in what round do you ultimately think he will be drafted? I mean, I can't even begin to answer that. Yeah, I mean, and the reason I wanted to bring this up because I don't want to ignore you, but the reason I can't, I am not going to make an NFL draft projection based off what a kid did in high school. And right now, that's what we've seen from Tyler. Having said that, I will say this. I think his skill set is that of a better passing version of Malik Willis. That's what I think his skill set is. Now, will he ever get close to that? I don't know. But, I mean, he's a dynamic athlete like Malik Willis, but I think he projects to be a much better passer. That, as we talk about the draft, I never understood the Malik Willis hype. Never understood it. Because I'm watching film and I'm like, this guy doesn't process well. He's not super accurate. He doesn't look comfortable. He's not a passer. I mean, he's just a great athlete. Like the reason I like Lamar Jackson coming out, because I'm like, if that guy gets coached up a little bit, he can drop back, read defenses, and throw the football. Lamar threw for like 3,600 yards there. He won the Heisman Trophy. Like he was a dynamic athlete, but he could throw the football. When I watch Malik Willis, I just see he's a better version a much better version, but he's closer to the Marshall kid from Auburn in 2013 than he is to Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. I mean, he's a really good athlete, but he was never, to me, an elite quarterback. I thought he was a media creation more than anything. The media, for whatever reason, picked up Malik Willis and hyped him up. But, I told you before the draft, I'd take Desmond Ridder over him. Well, fortunately for me, the NFL teams agreed with that and took him before Malik. But yeah, I don't see it with Malik Willis. I think Tyler has a better feel for the game than Malik Willis does at an early age. But in regards to projecting him to the draft, I've seen him throw 35 passes in college. I got to see a lot more than that in a very specific role to feel comfortable. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I can't make an answer either. I was thinking the same thing. It's just I haven't seen enough, right? And like that's too much of a projection. That's 2 years out, and I mean, who knows what's going to happen? He could be phenomenal, or he could just be good. I mean, there's a big variance with a guy like Tyler Buchner because the talent is exceptional, but he just hasn't played a ton, right? So like, there's innate things that are just going to kind of be picked up. So I agree completely with you. And to the Malik Willis thing for a second, Brian, this one's going to make you funny. There was a guy that was arguing me on Twitter before the draft that he was the next Michael Vick. So there's there's always some takes out there, man. People have takes.
Talking about Malik Willis?
Yeah. Someone had it was a verified source that also said this, man. So yeah. Yep. Twitter's a fun place. Twitter's a great place.
It really sucks. I know you're being sarcastic. It really sucks. It really sucks. A couple more draft questions. We'll get to a couple of recruiting questions, and then we got to get out of here because I have a meeting I got to get to. But Matthew Jackson asked a question for y'all. You might get to it, but I'm about to have to leave for class. Watch it later. What do you guys think Tyree needs to do this coming year in order to get drafted next year? Look, Chris Tyree's only going to be a junior this year. He would have to. I mean, he'd have to rush for 13 plus and stay healthy, and I mean, just have a big year. I don't see him leaving after this year unless he has just a monster. What does he need to do? Rush for 1,300 plus yards, 10 plus touchdowns, run a 4.3 at the combine. I mean, does that kind of cover it? I'm not being sarcastic. I'm just saying, like, he hasn't played a lot of football, right? Like, he's got a lot to prove. Now, I'll say this. Running back is the one position where a one-year wonder can leave and be picked high, especially if he's going to test like Chris Tyree. So I will say that. But I definitely don't think Chris is going to be he's definitely not, even with 1,400 yards and a bunch of touchdowns and a great test, I still don't see him being a first-round draft pick. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ryan, but I still don't see that.
No, I mean, he doesn't have a physical profile.
Right.
I mean, if you're a first-round draft pick, a running back, that's because they think that you could be an every down type of back, right? Like that's never going to be Chris Tyree. I think Chris Tyree, even if he just has like let's say in theory he just has a good season. Let's not even say like some crazy number like 1,400 yards. If he just has a good year, averages a healthy yards per carry, has the kick return background, and runs 4.3, he's getting drafted. Like there's no doubt about that with that type of profile. But to Brian's point, I don't think that the upside is ever going to be of a first round pick just because he's just not a high volume kid.
Right.
I mean, it just is what it is.
I mean, look, LaMichael James rushed for 1,500 yards, 1,700 yards, 1,800 yards at Oregon. He had 14 touchdowns, 21 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns. Also caught 51 passes for 586 yards in his career. And I believe, if I remember correctly, LaMichael James also did pretty well at the combine, correct? If I remember correctly, I'm going to try to find his combine results from the NFL. He ran a 4.35. Ran a 4.35. Okay.
Nice.
But he was 5'8" and 194 pounds. And he was the number 61 overall pick in the draft. It's size, profile. And again, this is a kid that in his worst year had 1,500 yards rushing in his worst year and had his work, I think, also 15 rushing touchdowns that year. Right. So
and he's not and I don't think he did anything really in the NFL at all either.
No,
if I remember correctly. He was drafted by the 49ers, I believe, and I don't think he did anything.
No, I don't think so either. I'm going to look up his NFL stats right here. But, part of it was he also had a very heavy workload in college. And that, I think, that had a factor too. But no, he didn't do a ton. He rushed for 125 yards in year 1, 59 in year 2. He had some injuries and he was out of the league in 4 years. I think Chris Tyree, one thing Chris Tyree has that LaMichael James didn't. I don't believe LaMichael James. I have to look at that actually now that I say that. Before I answer that, I don't remember him being a kick returner, but his last year at Oregon, he returned 3 kicks his career. His last year at Oregon, he had 13 punt returns with a touchdown. But he only returned 3 kicks his entire career. So I don't remember him being a kick returner.
I was going to say they had the DeAnthony Thomas kid, right? They had Josh Huff. They were both more of the return men in that time.
The point is he doesn't have that on his docket, right? Where Chris Tyree has that. That's going to be beneficial to him. But again, we have to understand Chris Tyree could be a great college running back, and he's not going to be a high draft pick, in my opinion. Like just because of the devaluation of the position from a drafting standpoint. I mean, think about it. Breece Hall and Kenny Walker. Kenny Walker was the Doak Walker Award winner and the Walter Camp, I believe, winner this year. Best player in college football. Had a monster season. Where'd he go? Round 2? Breece Hall was round 2. No running backs got picked in round 1, correct?
No.
And these are guys that had monster years that ran in the 4.3s at the combine. And they're much bigger than Chris Tyree. So Chris Tyree's college success is not going to be tied to him being a high pick. And I think the fact that he doesn't have a lot of wear and tear is going to make it. The other thing you got to understand about Chris Tyree, I don't know if y'all know a lot about his family. If you ever follow his dad on Twitter, I would argue his dad tweets more stuff about his kids' GPAs than he does about their on-field success. Like that's the kind of family Chris comes from. It's like a very like strong upbringing. Like, look, football's important, track's important, those things are important, but being a better man, being a student, preparing yourself for success beyond the field is something that's very important to them. So barring him just having a monster year and us looking at this as like after Bijan, there's like nobody in the running back class. I don't see him coming out even with the big year. But now 2024 draft, different conversation. Hulk Strong is speaking of Chris Tyree with a super chat. Thank you for that. Can you see Tyree having 1,000-yard rushing and receiving year, and would he leave? If he does that, he's gone, and he should be gone. I mean,
we're talking about 1,000 rushing and 1,000
receiving. Yeah.
Not a chance.
If he does, he's gone. But no, I don't see that happening. That's not the kind of receiver that he is, in my opinion.
And here's a question. I would love the answer to this. I know. So obviously, Marshall Faulk did that in the NFL. Christian McCaffrey did that in the NFL. Roger Craig. So 3 players have done it in the NFL. Has a college player ever done that?
It's a good question. If it happened recently.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's ever happened. And if it did happen, it would be some kid that played at like a smaller school. Right.
I think if I remember correctly, I think Christian McCaffrey one year at Stanford had like 700 yards receiving and then like 1,800 rushing. Right. So like, I doubt anybody's ever done that. That sounds pretty absurd to me.
I'm just kind of going back. I'm 2018 right now. Am I looking at receiving yards? Yeah, okay, here we go. Nope. There's a guy from Virginia that was listed as a running back that had 1,000 yards, but he rushed for 83. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he wasn't a running back. I'm going to say that was misclassified.
Or he was recruited as a running back, and then
right, and they just
receiver,
decided they never wanted to change it. I'm at 16 now, and I'm still not seeing any receivers with 1,000 yards rushing and receiving. So
there's no way
I don't
that
remember
happens.
it. I don't remember it happening, to be honest with you, but who knows? But and I think the thing that Notre Dame fans are going to think, like, well, he had that 100-yard game in the bowl game. That's an anomaly, right? But he also had 18 rushing yards that game. So like, it's usually not both.
Right.
I wonder what Travis Etienne didn't have close to that, but I'm wondering what he did in his last year, because I know he had a lot more receiving production in his last year than he had 588. Like, he caught 48 balls for 580 yards. That's he caught the ball a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of production, and he still didn't come even close to that. So anyway, last couple before we get out of here. We do have a couple of recruiting questions here. Great questions, everybody, today. Really, really good questions. Couple here. It's crazy like a Foskey. Sorry if this has been asked. Do we have an over-under number for May recruits? So I'm hesitant to do this just because of the last month, because the lesson that I've learned is we're seeing more and more and more kids making silent commitments for down the road times that have to do with, I want to take this official, I want to take that, I want to get this video made. There's a lot more going on to this than meets the eye. It's not like we've seen in the past. And so I hesitate to make a guess. I would say, as of now, I know of 4 players that plan on making public commitments at some point in time in the month of May. Mm-hmm. Right now, I feel really good about Notre Dame in 3 of them. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of – because like last month, so, well, they didn't get to the 5.5. Well, not publicly. That's the frustrating thing with the whole thing. Not publicly, but I'm hesitant, especially since Notre Dame is doing that June 10th. I could see Notre Dame saying, hey, hold off on let's do something that weekend to make it a bigger thing with some of these uncommitted kids on campus. I could see something like that. So I hesitate to jump on a number, Ryan, other than that as of right now, because there was a kid who was supposed to come in April that decided to push it back to May. I don't know if the kids in May are going to decide to push it to June. So I'm hesitant to throw a number out there this month, because they ended up getting 4, including 24 kids. They got Buchner, they got Braylon James, right, in the 2023. Those are the only 2 in the 23 class, right? Mm-hmm. Then they got Brandon Davis Swain in 24, and they got the kid Jabron Payne in 2022. Right. But we weren't counting 22 kids in there. We were counting 23 and 24 kids.
I'll say I'll put a number out there, because why not? You can hold it to me if you want. I'll say 2023 kids. I'll say there's going to be 4. Okay. I'll just say 4. Let's stay there.
Okay. I think it's fair. As long as kids don't change their dates around, I think I'm comfortable with that. Bobby S says, is Great House, Absher, Lamar, Houston realistic for May commits? Some of those. Go ahead.
I was going to say for May, I'd say 3 out of 4 are realistic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd say 3 out of 4.
I think this is a great way to end the show. This is a great question. And unless there's a super chat kind of coming up, this is going to be a good way to end. This is a great question from Timeout Tom. He asked us on the message board. He said, you've got Dante Moore as a Pied Piper. And I've made that comment several times. Can a commitment list of receivers like Braylon James, and let's just say hypothetically, Jaden Greathouse, Rodney Gallagher, and Ronan Hannafin be Pied Pipers for Dante Moore? I think that is a great question. And my answer to that, Ryan, simply would be yes. I think they could. Because I think the reason why is, number one, Dante would have a lot more confidence that, hey, I'm going to be surrounded by guys. Like, you look at the breakout from Jadarian Price in the spring. Tobias Merriweather is a top-ranked recruit coming in, right? Tight ends we all know about. If Notre Dame's able to land big-time receivers, because that's 3 top 100 dudes basically right there, right? And then the 4th guy who's, a 3-star has offers from Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, and USC recently, right?
Right. Right.
And so Alabama wants him at receiver, Ronan Hannafin. So if that's your lowest ranked guy, that's one heck of a flipping recruiting class at receiver. And the thought's got to be, hey, Dante, if we can do this without you, imagine what we can do with you. And so, yeah, Tom, I think there's some merit to that. Will it be the case? I don't know. But I think, it's like maybe that's the approach Notre Dame needs to take. Hey, we tried to get Dante in the class to be the leader to get everybody else. So let's go get some guys to go public here and have that effect on Dante. That's not a bad strategy now that you think about it, Tom. I really like that, Ryan. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, all I'll say here is if you already have Braylon James in the class, if Notre Dame's able to land a Jaden Greathouse, a Rodney Gallagher, and a Ronan Hannafin, I mean, would there be is there somebody that would have a better wide receiver group in 2023 than that? Like that is
tough.
That's really good. I mean, it's got to be top like 2 or 3.
It's going to definitely be top
groups.
3 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So either way, at some point, there has to be like a moment where you're just kind of like, if you're the staff and you've pulled off that, if Chancey Stuckey pulled off that and the staff pulled off this without a quarterback, I mean, wouldn't you at one point you just go to Dante and be like, Dante, like, do you see all this, man? Like,
and there's a chance they could have Monroe Freeling in the class by then. There's a chance they could have Sullivan Absher in the class by then. Sam Pendleton's already there. They've already got 2 running, they've already got a running back and 2 in last year's class. Maybe they might get another running back. You've got a top 150 tight end. It's just like, hey man,
what's the holdup? What's the holdup?
Like, we're now waiting on you. Right. And so, yeah, I could dig that. Like, you want to go play over there? Who they got that can match with this? Right. You know what I mean? So you want to take some NIL money? You can make that here. Right. We just can't hand it to you. You got to earn it, but you can make that here because these guys are going to help lead you to the Heisman. I mean, that's in like Tom Mendoza said in that article, look, if a kid's a Heisman Trophy contending quarterback at Notre Dame, he's going to have plenty of opportunities to make a lot of money legally.
Mm-hmm.
And, the thing is there. So, Tom, I think that's a great observation. I mean, it really is a great observation because normally it's the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. But the other point too, Ryan, is let's just say that Notre Dame is able to get 3 of those 4 before Dante decides he's going to go public. What does it say about this staff that they're able to do that without a quarterback in the class? I mean, what does it say about Chancey Stuckey and Tommy Reese and Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman if they're able to put that receiver class together without having a quarterback in the class? And last year's quarterback was a 3-star kid.
It says they're all relentless and says they're all dogs on the recruiting trail. I mean, like, yeah, man, it's incredible to think about. I mean, I almost wanted to write, and obviously Notre Dame at the moment has only landed 1 of those 4 that we're highlighting right now, right? But I almost wrote an article over the weekend where it's just like, can we praise Chancey Stuckey for a split second here of what he's done since he's arrived on campus? Because, man, it's just a guy that has very little experience recruiting, and the impact that he's had on the recruiting trail so far is just it's insane to think about. Man.
Now he's got to close. That's the key.
Of course,
he's got to close. But the fact that Notre Dame is like this is a legitimate option. Am I ready to predict that right now? No. I still, with Rodney Gallagher, I know things went really well, but I'm just not as confident in some other people I know are in projecting him there. I'm not as confident in that yet, but I do think it's legitimate. I do think it's a legitimate thing. So the fact that we're even having that, and I don't even think it's a stretch. I don't think it's like, oh, gee, cross your fingers and hope all. I would say right now, in my opinion, I'd say they lead for 3 of those guys right now, at least 3 of those guys. I know people that I have sources that tell me that they lead for all 4. I'm just going to continue to say I'm not as so. I think Rodney Gallagher had a great visit, but as I said last week, I want to see how he feels coming out of Penn State, and then same thing's going to happen in June. He's going to visit Notre Dame, and then the next weekend he's going to go to Penn State. There's other schools he's going to visit. I want to see how he does. Does that feeling about Notre Dame still there after you've made some other visits? I'm just not as confident in that one as Notre Dame being the leader in that one as I am the other 2. And obviously Braylon James already in the class. So, but still, I'd be surprised if they don't get 2 of those 3 to go with Braylon James. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, right? Like, I feel like I am one of the believers that does think that they. I
Mhm.
mean, obviously James has been landed, but like the other, the other three receivers, just looking at in that list, I think they probably lead for all three right now.
Yeah,
And I know you make a valid point. It's like that was Rodney Gallagher's first time at Notre Dame, so like when
right,
it wears off a little bit, like let's see what the real truth
right,
happens. And same thing with Jaden Greathouse, even though Greathouse is going to be back on campus, pretty soon relative to kind of recruiting. So you feel good about it, but either way, I mean, even if you only
right.
land 3 of the 4,
It's a heck of a
okay,
receiving class.
right,
And who
exactly.
was my number one ranked player in the entire class last year? It was Tobias Merriweather, a receiver. My thing with Gallagher, the one difference in Gallagher and Greathouse for me, Ryan, and is Greathouse came into Notre Dame's visit, even though we thought Texas was the leader, but he came in with a very high opinion of Notre Dame. As you reported, he already set up 2 visits to Notre Dame
Right.
already before ever having been here. So whereas Gallagher came in with much more of a we'll see kind of mentality.
Mhm.
And so, but to your point is he did have a great visit and he is open. So I'm just not. I don't know what it is. I'm just not quite as comfortable on that one just yet. But me being not comfortable means maybe they're a 1B. I just don't think he has it there yet. That's where I'm coming from. Is I think if he was forced to maybe pick a team, maybe he picks Notre Dame as his leader. I just don't think he's there yet. That's my thing. I don't think he's
Right.
there in his recruitment yet to really be there. That's just my 2 cents on
That's
that
what
one.
this month is. That's what this month is for. This is the
Right.
decision making time now for Gallagher. Yep,
Right.
agreed.
Right. All right. That's going to be it. So we got one more thing I got to pull up here, and he got it on time today, and it's right there. May say K. Join the message board, everybody. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the podcast, and if you are listening via podcast format, please give us a 5-star review and go Irish. You can find the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We've got all types of cool goodies here in the links below for you to check out. We're always talking ball. We are talking a lot about the article I wrote today about the NCAA's absolute lack of leadership and courage and integrity. That conversation is raging. People come from both sides of the ball on the message board today. I'm going to have some articles on about that here the next couple days, and just about different things I think the NCAA needs to do to fix the portal problem, to make NIL something that's really positive, and also something that's positive for players, but also something that's not being used in the way that it is now, which is outside the spirit of what NIL is supposed to be about. Have a lot of stuff on that, playoff conversations, all types of things coming up on how to fix college football. And so quite a presumptuous take, but you all know me. I'm not afraid to say things like that. So I'm going to say them. And Ryan's going to have tons of recruiting stuff coming out. We have 2 different mailbags on the front page right now. We have one on offense, one on defense, because we had so many good questions. And of course, Ryan, once he hangs up this here today, he's going to be on the phone, calling kids and just kind of seeing where everything is at. So make sure you are locked into the irishbreakdown.com and the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com to get all of it. So everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. Thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.